Okay, I'd like to call the meeting of February 13, 2019 meeting of the Board of Education. Mrs. Hutchinson, would you please call roll?
Mrs. Erickson? Here. Mr. Gambiani?
Here.
Mr. Matheson?
Here.
Mr. Broman?
Here.
Mrs. Crabtree is absent. Mr. Hamlin is absent. Mr. Paulson?
Here. Mr. Matheson, would you please lead us in the pledge?
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, communications with Postman. Sure.
Thank you, Mr. Paulson. I'd like to introduce Dr. Schaefer-Meyer, who is in her first year as principal here at Whittier Elementary School. Number one, thank you to all of our student hosts for that tour. I think I shared with the board before that a couple of weeks ago, actually, we did our first ever Twitter chat within the school district, and the focus of the Twitter chat was student voice. So it was nice to get a tour of the building through the voice of students to tell us what you like about your school and some of the areas unique to it. And so I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Schaefer-Meyer and our Whittier students. And I think you're going to tell the board a little bit about Whittier.
Thank you so much for having us tonight. Good evening to the members of the Board of Education, the administration, and our guests in the audience. I am Dr. Schaefer-Meyer. I'm the principal of Whittier, and I want to extend a warm welcome to all of you. I'm proud to share our space with the Board of Education and administration tonight for this evening's meeting. While you're here, you will no doubt sense what a special place Whittier is. It's not just our space, but it is our people who really occupy this space that make Whittier so special. I'd like to recognize now at this moment our staff and our families who are in attendance tonight. Just take away. And we have just a winning combination here. It's our combination elements of our caring and compassionate learning environment, our high expectations for student growth and academics, and our dedication to this community that make Whittier such a special place. So to prepare for this evening's presentation, school-wide we asked our students, what makes Whittier so special to you? We asked our 5th grade students then, because they're completing their tenure as elementary students here at Whittier, we asked them to work with our librarian media specialist, Lisa Zink, who's out in the crowd as well, to craft a video presentation for you, emphasizing their own thoughts and beliefs about what makes Whittier so special. So now I'd like to introduce our students and take this microphone.
I'm Ellie Flores. I'm Ryan Spade. I'm Katie Dracus. I'm Ian Boo. I'm Abby Orrick. Thank you for visiting Whittier tonight. And now our original work, What Makes Whittier So Special. So sit back, relax, and enjoy.
next is modifications to the agenda, and I have one modification we're going to make. We're going to remove the closed session item. It's not going to be required tonight. Any other modifications to the agenda any board members wish to make? Okay, next is public comments. Once again, no public comments. Okay, next is the superintendent report. Dr. Schuler.
Thank you, Mr. Wilson. And I just want, for the record, I want the board to know that the newly revised script for public comment is really good. You did a nice job of revising it. We just haven't used it since we revised the script. But yes, but it is really good. A couple of things that I want to just share with the board tonight, make comment on and make sure that we share out after the meeting. Number one, it has been an interesting winter in terms of weather, and well, I very much enjoy time spent with colleagues. I think Bill's getting a little bit tired of calling me at 4:15, 4:20 in the morning, but hopefully we are nearing the end of it. We have gotten a couple of questions from community members asking if in fact we do need to make up all of the snow days, especially the cold days, because of the state of emergency that was issued around that, and the answer is yes, we do. So in our calendar, we put 5 emergency days in the calendar, and the first 5 days that we call due to snow, due to cold, due to any kind of emergency do get made up. So as of right now, we're 4 days in. So if we look at the calendar, I think that's June 11th. Which is a Tuesday, is our tentative last day of school. And again, I say tentative based on the fact that obviously we've still got to get through the balance of the winter. But we've been asked that question a few times. Can we at least kind of get that information out so that community is aware of it? And we will certainly after the meeting tonight. Second, in your green folders, there are a couple of things that I just wanted to mention, call your attention to. I think they're in your green folders. They're not in my green folder, but I think they're in your. Yep, thank you. So one of them is there's this little half sheet of paper that's from the Student Excellence Foundation for their Celebrate Our Stars event. So annually, the Student Excellence Foundation does a teacher recognition program where they recognize 6 educators from across the district, 3 on the north side of town, 3 on the south side of town. And so this has been pushed out recently at buildings, but I wanted to mention both to the board and community members if there is a special educator that you want to recognize. We would certainly love to have lots of nominations for the Celebrate Our Stars event. So take a look at that. The second thing that is in your green folder as well is this kind of colorful sheet of paper that says District 200 safety drill. So Dr. Kyle and the safety committee have been working now for a little while to plan in conjunction with Wheaton Police, Wheaton Fire, DuPage Office of Homeland Security, a large-scale kind of 2-part safety exercise that's going to take place on Tuesday of spring break week. So a couple of things that it's going to test out, and I think the idea, the concept is that they want to build kind of a training module that can be shared with other school districts as well, where we're going to test some of our actual safety protocols in one of our buildings. So the drill is going to take place at Wheaton North, but it will involve actually a reunification of students from North to another site. So it'll actually simulate students needing to leave the building, not being able to re-enter the building, and needing to be basically moved to another site, a reunification site, where eventually they'd be reunified with family members. And again, if you think about kind of a drill or the purpose in something like that, certainly could be used in obviously major safety occasions, but if you think of things like powers out at a building, we've got to move students, can't get them back in, issues perhaps around like a gas leak or issues like that where you need to move a building, we really want to know that we've got a protocol where we can move an entire building of students and and reunify them if we needed to. So we are looking for volunteers still for that drill, volunteers in the way of adults or high school students. So if you know a high school student that is looking for something to do between 8 and 12 p.m. that Tuesday of spring break, what's in it for them is food. So we're, with some generous donations, we're feeding breakfast, feeding lunch for any of our student or adult volunteers. But there's a website on your sheet. There's also a QR code. We've shared this with some of our community organizations, Lions Club, some of our service organizations, and in fact, some of them have volunteered to help. So again, we need both adults and high school students, and we're doing okay, but Charlie, I think we could still use a few more, right?
Yeah, we're at 135 right now.
Okay.
Probably, definitely adult-wise, we're looking really good. Probably could use about 10 more students. That's probably going to be there. We're looking good.
The original goal was to have about 150 volunteers, and we're getting closer to that. So again, good opportunity.
Students will not be in session.
They will not be this spring break.
Isn't there a new state law that requires this type of drill? And if so, is it with students or without?
There is a new state law that you do have to practice your safety drills within a certain amount of time of the beginning of the year. There was some discussion about mass crisis drills, and I think there was some push toward that happening when students were there. But you do have to execute all of your safety protocols within a certain time.
So we'll ultimately, through this or some point in the future, we'll have such a drill.
Correct. And then just the last thing I wanted to mention, kind of still along that line, I think a little bit earlier this week, there was a postcard that got mailed to all homes in District 200. So similar to what we did during the referendum, where we did some listening town halls, we wanted to continue that theme, that opportunity for engagement. And so through the calendar year 2019, we've mapped out 4 town hall listening sessions that we're going to do. The first one is coming up in early March, and the focus of that listening town hall session will be on school safety. So we're going to do that one in partnership with our local police departments and fire department. And again, kind of the goal, similar to what we did during the referendum, is to share a little bit of information about our approach to safety, some of the highlights, but then have an opportunity to really field questions, see what's on everybody's mind. So March, school safety. As we get into May, early May, we're going to do our second town hall session on finance and budget. Have an opportunity to share some highlights around our finance budget cycle, and then again field some questions. And then we will do the second 2 town hall sessions after the start of next school year. We've got one tab that we're looking at social emotional learning and that initiative, and then a second one in the curriculum communications. Right? Is that the writing communications piece that we're looking at for later in the year? But we will do a separate mailer, so at some point prior to the start of next school year, we'll do one more mailer that will have a little bit of a kind of state of the district piece, along with an invitation to the second 2 town halls. So again, we want to continue that theme of engagement. I think that's all I've got for tonight.
Any questions? Okay, next on the agenda is the consent agenda. This is my first big test with 16 items to read. First, acceptance of gifts from Lowell Elementary School PTA. Number 2, acceptance of gift to Wheaton North High School Athletic Department Bill Nybeck, Senior Award Scholarship. Number 3, approval of revised policy 2.80, board member oath and conduct. Number 4, approval of revised policy 2.120, board member development. Number 5, approval of revised policy 6.60, curriculum content. Number 6, approval of revised policy 6.210, instructional materials. Number 7, approval to post World Civilization 1 and Advanced World Civilization textbooks for community review. Number 8, approval to post new child development textbook for community review. Number 9, approval to post fashion merchandising textbook for community review. Number 10, approval to post elementary social studies textbooks for community review. Number 11, approval of work plans for Hubble, Monroe, and Franklin middle schools. Number 12, approval of bids for the 2019 facility improvements, doors at 12 buildings, chairlift, sprinkler system replacement, and ROE building permit applications. Number 13, approval of audit services. Number 14, approval of bills payable and payroll. Number 15, approval of minutes. January 16, 2019, open and close, and approval to destroy recordings of closed sessions prior to September 2017 as allowable by law. And 16, approval of personnel report to include employment, resignation, retirement, and leave of absence of administrative certified, classified, and non-union staff. Are there any items board members would like to have removed from this consent agenda? Okay, Dr. Schuler, any information to share?
Just a couple of questions that I want to highlight. There were a couple of questions, I think, on the child development textbook. Faith, you want to answer that? I think Mr. Crabtree had asked a question about just the use of that book.
Sure. There was a question about what books are currently being used or not being used in our child development book. It was from 2004. So it was rather outdated. A lot of the CPR was recommending that book were outdated, so they had not been using a book. This new book is actually copyrighted for next year. It's a brand new publishing of it, so it was up to date, and it is going to be used for our child development 1 and 2 class. Kind of a related question to that is how does a textbook get on the list to be reviewed? 10 years ago, our district had a 7-year cycle that every textbook went through a process every 7 years to see whether we should review it or not, and whether we should pilot it. When budget cuts and things came through, and also the number of books that were going online, we stopped doing that. So at the high school level, we sit down with the department chairs, and they've got their list together of what books should be reviewed or needed to be reviewed. We don't take them all, we're not even close, but especially for the ones that we can't get copies of anymore because they're so outdated, those make it to the top of the list. We look at how much budget we have and prioritize those for the next we read, piloted, reviewed, bring publishers to look at the materials. So there were just a couple of questions about what our textbook review cycle.
Do we use a lot of textbooks that are not electronic?
Yes.
Is it predominant, or which is more common?
All of the recent adoptions that we're doing have online pieces that go with them, but we still have quite a few classrooms that prefer having the actual book as opposed to the online piece. So the publishers really do that as a marriage. They're not going to want to get the other one. It's not a discount to get the online book piece. So most of the adoptions, we're taking less textbooks and having class sets, but we're still having class sets in class for people to look at at the table. So it's less books per class, but we still are seeing a lot of hardbound books.
Do the electronic books get updated on any sort of regular basis? I mean, by a publisher, I guess would be the question.
They occasionally do, but you have to go through, for most publishers, and go through a whole new adoption series so you can continue to pay publishers.
Is the fashion merchandising textbook equally outdated? That was one of my questions.
Yes, it's horrendously outdated. I did bring all of the books that are being looked at tonight for posting if anyone wants to review them.
I think those will come back again. You know, like bell bottoms, they come back.
And one other question for number 12, the approval of bids. So this is a portion of the projects that we sent out for bid. What is not yet included in this package? What's coming? I think if I recall, there's a lot of roofing.
The major projects that are still out there are roofing and flooring. So that's big. Big package that will be going out for the
Any other questions from the board on consent agenda items? Okay, ask for a motion. Do I have a motion to approve the consent agenda as presented?
I move that we approve the consent agenda as presented.
Do I have a second? Moved by Mr. Broman, seconded by Mrs. Erickson. Do I have a roll call vote?
Mr. Broman?
Yes.
Mrs. Erickson?
Yes.
Mr. Gambiani?
Yes.
Mr. Matheson?
Yes.
Mr. Paulson?
Yes. The consent agenda is approved. Oops. Now we have another consent agenda, this one covering public policies that we are posting. We have 7 items. The first is approval of post revised policy 6.50 school wellness for public review and comment. Approval of post revised policy 7.100 health, eye and dental examinations, immunizations and exclusions of students for public review and comment. Number 3, approval to post revised policy 7.200 suspension procedures for public review and comment. Number 4, approval to post revised policy 7.250 student support services for public review and comment. Number 5, approval to post revised policy 7.290 suicide and depression awareness and prevention for public review and comment. Number 6, approval to post revised policy 7.305 student athlete concussions and head injuries for public review and comment. And number 7, approval to post a new policy 7.260 exemption from physical education for public review and comment. Are there any items board members want to remove from this policy post? Okay, I do have one question on this. So if we post a policy and the board feels like they'd like to discuss some changes, and we get comments back, do we have to repost it again the next meeting?
Yes, I think you, if you made changes as a result of either the window where it was posted or I guess a board member suggestion, I think you'd have to repost it for another 30 days.
I have a question. So, in what forum would we make suggestions or have discussion about? Is that something asking about tonight?
Yeah, I would think it's at the board table. I mean, unless, again, I guess unless the question or the issue being raised is not for specific language, but I guess a recommendation that the policy committee go back and wrestle with something, but this is the venue for the board, I think, to talk about any suggested changes or questions that you have.
I have another comment then. So one of the policies, which one is it? 6.50, for school wellness. Just as background for the rest, we're going to sit on the policy committee, and we were going through, Jim Broman and I are on that committee, we were going through all of these policies, and most of them are just changes to bring them in line with press language. And so we weren't making a whole lot of changes to anything, but there were a couple of places in that particular policy where we had some specific language for our district that did come out, and I feel like when we did the review, I didn't realize that there might be a reason specifically why some of the specifics were in there. So it makes me wonder if we should revisit a couple of them. One piece being the line where it talks about not using edible items as rewards.
You're talking about item number 1, 6.50 school wellness.
Yeah, there are a couple of lines that we pulled out. Physical activity should be promoted as a positive health benefit, therefore forms of exercise should not be used for disciplinary reasons during the school day. So there's, I think, 3 bullet points here. The second one talks about encouraging opportunities for daily physical activity outside of gym class, and mentions not taking away recess privileges, for instance, is a disciplinary issue. And then the last one talks
put them in specifically for our district, and I don't know if that's an issue. The question of whether we want to still have them there.
Just log in if you have any initial comments on those things.
Yeah, I guess a few thoughts. First piece is, with some of the changes obviously recommended that you reference or bring this alignment with the policy, but obviously this was a pretty customized policy that was written with 7 years back initially. And so, one of the things that we can one of the things that we can some of the pieces with the food items, we obviously think that's important, right? So the suggestion is to transfer some of those things over to California. There will only, as we know, in our school wellness policy, over the same piece with the of our parents. Clearly list right now, we have a cross-reference with 6.5 hours to the handbook. We can clearly lay those things out for our parents, so it's clearly delineating food items, celebrations, all those different pieces. And they are our handbook, which is the process that we go through this spring. The wellness policy itself, yeah, I mean, there are some things in there, obviously, that we want to continue to promote. We also consider how much do we want to that policy that is practice and belief, how much of it is policy. So, I strike that balance is dramatically different from our process. Okay, that answers all your questions.
I feel bad talking to the microphone. I have to put that here. But farther on in the policy, I'm realizing that is where they're talking about healthy foods during the school day. We mentioned the allergy policy. We talk about non-edible items for birthdays. So I guess the question is, do some of these things need to be in the policy as opposed to just our operating procedures that I don't know who's making those decisions. Is that the handbook committee? Is that principals? And I guess my one question would be, so my kids went through elementary school when we were still bringing birthday treats. And I heard the whole hubbub when you couldn't bring birthday treats anymore, and they were promoting non-edible items for celebrations. So if this is not in our policy anymore, is that going to be construed to say that birthday treats are back in? I don't know if the general public pays attention to the policies, so we react to that. So where does that kind of language need to go?
Yeah, so my first thought is, if it's in the handbook, right, that is certainly an enforceable piece, and the plan would be to be more specific in the handbook for our parents, at least on the edible piece, right, with the non-edible in school. So it could certainly be enforceable there and more broken out than it is right now, to include different statements in there. Could we include within the policy? Yes. Now I will caution, I guess I would caution against this, that the notion of school wellness, we're getting somewhat narrow there as well, because we also have a 7.285, which is with our cross-references with our allergy plan, which covers kind of all the steps out that our nurses would be in the year to look at all of our students that have allergies, to put a plan in place for them, to communicate with all the relevant people, and then all of our staff have to go through the training as well. So we also have that piece in place, and another step that we could take as well is looking at our administrative procedure regulation for the 7.285. So everything I think in either place, we're covered into practice that is instilled in our schools. We're put it in our handbook and make you a more specific place. So my thought would be yes, but obviously discussion.
Any other questions on those policy items?
Those are any?
On those 7 items that are on there?
Yeah, I do. There's a couple of them in here that, you know, the student athlete concussion, head injury, review and comment, do we cover any kind of insurance or liability? And if so, is it separate or is it part of the ISHA? How is that work?
Do you have a question?
Basically, how do we ensure as a district to protect us against liability associated, for instance, with student concussions and so on? What covers our liability? What insurance policy?
We're in a collective liability insurance cooperative, which is cooperative with a number of school districts. There is mandatory IHSA coverage for acquired, and we have that coverage under the CLIC policy. So we do have all that under the umbrella of our liability policies for CLIC.
In light of that, then, does anyone from those co-ops, or if we have individual policies for any of these other type items, do they do like an audit of our policies? I mean, where, they would comment and say that's inadequate, or is it just, we make up the policy and that's what it is?
There's about 125 members of the co-op. There's an executive board that works with the broker that brokers the policy, and the broker will provide advice and counseling to the executive board. Again, that's a representative group of the districts in there, about 7 or 9 members. And so that board will make decisions to the full board, which is all the member districts. So we rely on the broker and executive board to bring forward the policies and plans that are necessary to meet the requirements.
Okay, so therefore, when we make changes like this, are those reviewed, or how? I guess I'm trying to determine if there's a linkage between, the governing or the overviewing CLIC in this case, or whatever, to assure that we're consistent with their policies and we don't have loopholes in coverage. I guess is my biggest concern.
Yeah, so I think we're talking about two different forms of policy kind of simultaneously. Policy is in the insurance policy that's covering students or accident piece, and then kind of this policy. So all of the policies that come through press are reviewed by a team of attorneys from across the state that verify we are in fact in alignment with all requirements from the policy. So at least your written policy is fully aligned with all required elements that have to be in there. CLIC, so through CLIC, as they're then designing the actual insurance that's covering students in the event of injury or that piece, right? They're designing the actual policy that's in line with this, but they also are aware of all of these elements that are in there. So there's no issue in terms of what you're providing versus what's written here in policy. You are good on both.
So a lot of these changes are driven by, as you referred to, in press.
Correct.
Okay. All of them are. And so when the committee reviews these, I mean, if we make modifications to these, that we create some exposure potentially. Is that a fair statement?
You can. Again, when you get a policy that comes through the press, right, they're also pretty clear as to what are the elements that are required to be in that policy because it's a compliance issue with the Illinois School Code, and what statements are optional based on perhaps what might be the interest of the local school district. And so what I would say is that in general, the press policies are really designed to be kind of a skeletal framework that addresses all of the required elements in school code. We have some of our policies where we've added to it. School wellness was a good example of that. That was really a policy that was written based more out of a committee that came together to address a couple of more global issues around wellness, a big part of that being edible treats in schools and some of the changes that were happening at the time, moving that out. But we had a group that came together locally and really wrote kind of a District 200 specific policy. That's one where we did make a decision to bring our policy more in line with what's in the press element element. And so we had some local elements that we're not required. So I think even the questions that Jenna asked, those are not required elements to the policy. They're just pieces that we had written into the policy locally that, again, in practice are not going away. So they've not been removed because we've said, gee, we're not doing any of these things anymore. We just really have pared down the board level policy, and I think have indicated that some of those elements need to either move into the practice of a handbook or an administrative procedure element, but they're not going away. But I hope that explains. For the most part, most of press is compliance with school code pieces, right? Making sure that our practice is aligned. In some cases, we've added elements to it just based on local choice.
And to clarify what press is and what do we do, subscribe to that?
We do. So it's a subscription that comes through the Illinois Association of School Boards. And again, there are a team of attorneys from around the state that press pulls together, and they regularly review changes in school code, changes in law. At every legislative session, there are no less than 25 to 30 bills that are passed that have some impact on the Illinois school code or some other law that governs schools. And so the press attorneys come together, look at those changes in law, and then recommend changes to policy to kind of bring our local policies in line with school code.
And to be clear, we don't have to comply, or we don't have to subscribe to that.
We don't.
And we elect to do that to assure that we are in compliance.
In fact, Jen and I and the senior leadership team met with the press representative on Monday for 3 hours to go over a number of policies and the format for coming into compliance with the press. And we'll give a little full report on that during the board reports later in the agenda.
Great.
Okay, I had one further comment on the first item and then one other policy. So the school wellness policy, similar kind of reaction to Jenna. That was modified or localized when Jim Mathis and I first got on board in spring of 2013. And I'm kind of looking at this through the lens of a parent of a child with a severe food allergy. So I kind of like this stuff. I understand, the rationale to take it out of the policy, but I want to make sure that, so the policy is very rarely read by the parents. So I like the idea of make sure it gets in the handbook. It's probably more likely to be read and understood and maybe addressed by that. The issue of the forms of exercise shall not be used for disciplinary reasons. I kind of like that philosophically. So as long as those items get kind of memorialized in a new way in the handbook, if I support that. Are we going to make any changes to 7.285, which is the food allergy policy? And then I'll ask my follow-up question to number 3.
Go ahead.
So question. Just leave it without.
No.
Can you hear me? First question, 7285, I'm going to make any changes to. Right now, the 7285 is written. It does lay out a process for the awareness of our allergies and we must follow steps that all of our nurses review in the year that we see in our buildings. I really think in making this transition, we put it in the handbook, right? And then we look at our procedure around 7285. So, with every policy, we have an opportunity to write administrative regulation, right? It's not mandated, but to have some procedural stuff behind 7285, which even reinforces the stuff we put in the handbook. I think we even give more means to our practice. Wouldn't be a direct change to 7285 unless there was a recommendation.
And then my second question relates to item number 3, which is the 7.200 suspension procedures. Just in kind of reading those changes, I was kind of wondering why we're not prioritizing notifying the parents before any charges are presented to the students. That felt a little strange to me. And then later in the specific thing about out-of-school suspensions, it only states that an attempted phone call to the parents has to be made, and I was kind of questioning what is an attempt? Is it?
I think mine works, right?
Seemed kind of nebulous to me.
All right, here we go. I'll answer both questions. I'll start with the last one first. Attempted parent phone call. I talked to some deans and administrators, and being a former administrator, is you pick up the phone, you call a parent, you don't get a hold of them, you leave a message, you call the next number. You continually try and get a hold of a parent. Sometimes there's situations where you can't get a hold of a parent. We're actually dealing with one right now where we've called about 20 times, and the parent won't pick up the phone. So the attempted contacting the parent is calling the phone numbers we have and trying to get a hold of them. The first question you had was, why don't we contact the parents before we go through the investigation? Being a former assistant principal and principal, we bring the student down, we ask them to tell the student what's happening, we talk to them, we go through that. Once we know what happened, what didn't happen, that is when we call the parents. Being a former principal, I had many parents who want to come down before we go through that, and almost every single time when the parents say don't talk, don't cooperate. Our goal as administrators are to keep the school safe, and our deans and our assistant principals and principals will go through the process, but that's why it's set up that way. It's not that we don't talk to the parents, it's we want to make sure we know what's going on and then we contact the parents, and then we go through the process.
Charlie, I want to clarify and make sure, because I think it's what you're saying. So in our language of notify the student of the charges, that means you're discussing with the student what happened. It doesn't mean you've done the investigation and then are circling back and saying that the notice of charges just simply means that's when you're working with the student to actually determine what did happen and was there a violation of the piece. So again, you've got to work with a student before you make the contact with the parent. I just don't think it'd be practical to always make a parent phone call before you even sat down and had a conversation with the student to determine what happened.
Okay, any other questions? Okay, can I ask for a motion for posting the policy posting consent agenda? Do I have a second?
Yeah, second.
Okay, moved by Mrs. Erickson, seconded by Mr. Roman. Can I have a roll?
Mrs. Erickson?
Yes.
Mr. Roman?
Yes.
Mr. Viviani?
Yes.
Mr. Matheson?
Yes.
Mr. Paulson?
Yes. Okay, that consent agenda is passed. We have one action item tonight, which is approval to post elementary social studies standards. Dr. Schuler.
Yeah, so this all course makes our way up to the podium. So this is your student learning feature for this meeting. This was an item that was on our consent agenda, and I thought it'd be good to just set a little context for our new social studies, our social science standards.
All right, so we're getting ready to roll out elementary social studies standards next school year, and kind of the vision behind it, and this is from the state of Illinois, is the addition of financial literacy that hasn't been part of the Illinois standards before that, and also this more focus on civically engaged. And our standards were adopted, they were adopted in Illinois 2017, so you may ask me, like, why are we behind? We're actually not behind. There's quite a few districts that haven't adopted that piece. But I did go through and look with publishers over a year ago, 2 years ago, to say, well, what do you have for me? So that we could look at those materials. And a lot of the publishers didn't yet have hard copies or have their items put together. So we've waited a little bit on our adoption of those pieces until we could have textbooks to review on and to play with. So our standards here, they call them the C3 framework. What you needed was another acronym, right? C3. So C3 is civics, college, and career. And one of the big differences between the old social studies standards and the new, other than financial literacy, when Common Core came out with the reading piece, social studies was really looked at as another way to teach informational text and have it be a reading / science social studies content piece. There's much more focus with the new piece on inquiry skills, which fits beautifully with FIT. If you think about social studies instruction, the way that I was taught was a lot of memorization of dates and actions and all those things. Siri and computers and Alexa and all that stuff can do that pretty well.
well. What we really want our students to be able to do is draw connections between pieces of social studies, look at that civics piece of how all of the rules of community fit together, the financial literacy, as I talked about, and the geography and history. So the standards have that big piece of inquiry skills, and the inquiry, we've included it as big questions, and then we're using the content piece to drive that. So the big instructional shift that I'll be talking about with all of our elementary staff at the upcoming Institute Day on March 1st is this change to teaching social studies through an inquiry method. We'll still be using informational text and reading to support that, but there will be a lot more discussion and hands-on and them interpreting facts and events from history. So just kind of the themes that go along with the new social studies standards, we have kindergarten with My Social World, I don't know why that's down in first grade, but living, learning, working together. Second grade, communities near and far, and then in fourth grade is really our state and our nation, what that looks like. Fifth grade is our biggest change, where we had been doing ancient history in fifth grade. Here in the district, those are really sixth grade standards, so we had moved those, and now we'll be much more focused on our nation and U.S. history at fifth grade. Those are some of the different skills and pieces that are covered under each of the disciplines. And the Illinois standards did not ask us to change our content pieces. That's a local decision on what topics we're going to cover, but we do need to cover the inquiry method and looking through that. So we did have a whole committee that went through and piloted different materials, made decisions about those pieces. We have pacing guides and vocabulary terms and all of that that goes along with that. But the standards that you have tonight are the standards that will be taught, assessed, and reported out on our elementary report cards. So it's really just thinking about a more active role in learning, which is great, perfectly aligned with FIT, and having students who create the questions, having them communicate, and then having them play a more active role in understanding small communities all the way up to the nation. Questions on social studies standards?
Training. What about training for teachers? When will that take place?
Sure. So on the first round, we've had a committee that has had representation from each school and each grade level that has been participating in choosing materials to go along with this. Really, the first piece that I always do is make sure that they understand the new standards, and then that group has piloted materials, gotten together, talked about what that is. But the first training for all elementary staff is the upcoming Countywide Institute Day on March 1st, where we'll be talking about inquiry method, and then we're breaking it into grade level groups. And each grade level group is going to be presented and facilitated by a principal, the LLC director, and one of the members of our committee, who will really get into each grade level and talk about those pieces. The textbook adoption piece will happen later on, and we'll be doing those trainings closer to the end of the school year when we have some of those materials in. And then we do anticipate needing to do ongoing training and support next school year as we dive into the new standards as well. One of the things that we're building, like we did with science, is having our LLC directors play an integral role in that as we do the inquiry piece. So we continue to have meetings and train them, and they help with the guidance of those pieces at each building. They're also looking at all the content pieces and making sure we've got books in our libraries that can support those pieces, because they'll play such an integral part in creating all the resources that go along with those.
There's a couple words that caught me. One slide back is the word participating. Somewhere participation and the second one. And then the next one, it talked about, next slide. Talk about, so they're acting in the classroom, school, and community. What's an example of activity or participation in the community?
So one of the things that they can be doing is looking at school district policy and saying, okay, what's going on? The example that came up as I was sitting here was wellness. Okay, how do you feel about that? What does that look like? How does policy get created at the local level? At the kindergarten level, they're talking about classroom rules. Okay, what's fair for individuals versus what's fair for the whole classroom, talking about a democracy versus teacher deciding the rules and how that works. You can even be talking about elections, you can talk about initiatives going on in the park district, you can talk about a referendum, but really bringing in local examples of civics.
Faith, I was looking at the Illinois mandated units of study guidance document that's on the agenda, and looking at to what topics need to be covered in various social study classes. And I looked at the mandated wording and clarification. I take it that's from the state of Illinois.
Yes.
You have found texts and resource material that will cover all of these items that are identified.
Textbook on Illinois is difficult because the publishers aren't willing to do that. Right. So what we have provided at that grade level is some of our own materials, websites, information that we have, and that was a big part of our elementary social studies work before that. So our libraries and our mobile programs are already full of information on Illinois.
So that committee of teachers with whom you worked and the library learning center directors were able to find resource material that could address all of these different topics that had been mandated by the General Assembly?
Yes, as well as inquiry projects to be supportive, and I'll be bringing some of that information in the social studies pieces forward soon.
Any other questions? So just a clarification, we're basically adopting the Illinois standards.
Correct.
We're actually approving to post the Illinois standards that we will then adopt.
Correct. It's part of our adoption process that we post them, but yes, they are verbatim the Illinois state standards. What will be unique to District 200 is some of the content pieces and the text pieces that we approve to use to teach that material.
So are those customization District 200 in this? Or is that just
those are just the standards. If you're interested in pacing guides and those types of things, we usually don't post those for public review, but I have it there.
Okay, any other questions? Okay, could I ask for a motion and a second to approve the posting of elementary social study standards for community review?
I so move.
Can I have a second? Okay, moved by Mr. Broman, seconded by Mrs. Erickson. Mrs. Hutchinson, please call the roll.
Mr. Broman?
Yes.
Mrs. Erickson?
Yes.
Mr. Viviani?
Yes.
Mr. Matheson?
Yes.
Mr. Paulson?
Yes. Motion passes. Okay, now we get to the oral report section. We have 3 items. First is our social emotional learning feature. Dr. Schuler.
And so with Dr. Slaggy.
All right. Thanks again for the opportunity to speak monthly about social emotional learning. Today I'm going to highlight something that's happening at Sandburg. I think the timing's kind of perfect, though. We just had a Twitter chat about student voice, and that obviously that student voice and personalization incorporates not only our fit learning environment, but also is a big part of our school connecting this piece and trying to connect with every student. So something that Sandburg does, and student surveys are not unique to just Sandburg, but I want to highlight exactly what Sandburg's doing from a global school level. This year, their SEL team actually created a student survey and focused around SEL and around fit. And their student survey was really aimed at gathering input from their students around social emotional learning competencies like problem solving, self-management, goal setting, collaborating, respecting one another, kindness, right? Mr. Bacon played a vital role in this with the team. He actually went around and he went to each classroom to give preface to the survey. And they did this in the fall, and they sat back down as a team to really analyze the data. When they looked at the data from the student survey, the voices that their 2nd through 5th grade students gave, they found some interesting things, particularly around students feeling that they were respecting others, but students not feeling respected. They saw a discrepancy there, and that actually led to them doing some work around empathy and teaching their students what empathy is. How do you problem solve? What does respect look like at Sandburg? So I give you this example, and then the survey again will be given this spring to see how their students are, if there's some improvement, but also giving their students another opportunity to give that voice. They actually broke this information out by teachers as well, so their teachers had their own classroom data, because there was some questions about feeling valued within your classroom, which is a close corollary to the work we're doing with our SEL framework on relationships and school connectedness, because we know when a student's connected to school, the emotional stressors go down. So I highlight this for a few reasons. One, it brings in the student voice piece. The aim is around the social emotional learning competencies, and it starts to look at that really important factor of school connectedness, and I believe in future work, you'll see us be more and more deliberate about our efforts to get that student voice around SEL, and then help us to respond better to meet our kids' needs. So take any questions on it, but I wanted to highlight that work, and again, as I've kind of recognized a lot of the work in our buildings, you see not only the teachers, but the principal taking a vital role in it, so that's exciting, and I hope that helps you feel excited too about the work on SEL.
I have a question on, in a typical week, how much classroom time is spent on social emotional learning? And then secondarily, how many questions are on the state test about social and emotional learning?
So to answer the first question, I would like to think that all of our instructional minutes are spent on social and emotional learning, because I believe that really engaging instruction has a social and emotional learning effect, right? So that is my belief, that all of our instructional minutes actually tie to SEL. Now, if we're really going to break it out though, social and emotional learning is happening in a lot of different ways. So in some classrooms, it may be 30 minutes a day spent on a direct lesson about a particular skill, especially at the primary level, where some of those foundational concepts are coming into play. At another grade level, it may be a really exciting project or problem-based learning activity that integrates some of these components, but the focus is on getting some of our reading standards and social studies standards with some of the SEL competencies in play. So that range from direct instruction, where I'm directly teaching a skill, may only be 30 minutes, but really, really engaging instruction, happening all the time, and integrating SEL should be happening all the time. The third kind of piece of that is, should be happening outside of our classrooms too. Service learning, big piece of what we just talked about here, even the example that Mrs. Dahlquist gave. There's definitely some SEL competencies we need to start thinking about problem solving, thinking about yourself as a citizen. Our co-curriculars, we're going to talk a little bit about that with Vision 2022. That's outside of the school day. That's the highest level of SEL. That's our experiential piece. Questions directly related to it on the state test. You're not going to get questions directly related to self-management or many of the competencies directly. But again, any good learning experience definitely incorporates SEL, which is going to give you a deeper learning experience, which should produce better results on the state test.
I would think it would be a major component of collaboration, for instance. You know, it's a blended issue, is my point. I think. Do you feel that District 200 is overachieving or achieving better than others? As you see this in other districts, this is an important thing to me, and I think we really achieved in this, but I don't have a standard to determine it. Do we have any way of measuring that?
Yeah, great question. Really important to me too, so I'm glad that we share that same feeling. So I would say, I would give you a few perspectives there. My sense is, one, that yes, social emotional learning is happening at a really high level in our district, okay? I know that from being a building principal, I know that from my experiences working with our SEL team, I know that from my experiences working very closely with our leadership team. I also believe that we have areas to grow, right? And that's a big reason why we're developing an SEL framework, or have developed a framework, and are starting to build out some structures that really delineate and will be able to give us some more concrete information around the key competencies within SEL. Right? I actually have a SEL Board of Education Committee team meeting tomorrow where we'll be highlighting each of those areas and how they kind of play out. I think the other factor that we can't discount either, though, is that when we have robust learning environments combined with teachers that have high emotional intelligence and are really focused on connecting with kids, we see student growth in the academic side too. And I always am reminded when Mrs. Dahlquist gave her student learning presentation, and we saw that scatter plot, and we saw how, when we look at our demographic, how we're overachieving almost any district in the state. That's a combination of really good instruction with a combination of really connecting with kids and focusing on SEL as well. So, as with anything, we got areas to grow in and get better, absolutely. I think we're doing a really good job too.
Yeah, just a quick observation. Yeah, we have a SEL committee meeting tomorrow, and this is that committee, which is new this year, and this kind of monthly update is kind of an indication of how important this issue is to not only the Board of Education, but to the district. And so I think keeping this conversation at every meeting, it's always in front of us, hopefully it's shared in the Friday focuses and stuff like that. That reinforces how important this is. Well, I have one question. So we have these individual kind of pockets of stories that we hear. How do those stories get shared kind of across the other 12 elementary schools so that things that one school might be doing and have success with can be shared and kind of routinized across the schools?
Yeah, so just from the fact of actually sharing amongst principals, we have multiple structures where our principals have an opportunity to learn and share together. A portion of one of our elementary principals meetings is focused around some collaboration time, around some guiding questions that typically deal with social emotional learning or our fit learning environment. They also we have meetings 4 times a year where they're within principal PLCs, and there's always social emotional questions deliberately woven in there as well, so they're sharing with each other, but also myself and Mrs. Dahlquist are the one guiding those conversations as well. But as you look at a more systematic approach, right, this leads me back to the framework, right? A framework allows us to give some buildings some autonomy, so you hear some of these things that really fit the needs of the building and allow them to be creative, but it also gives us a common vision, right? So that gives us kind of that tight new structure that says, here's the expectation, but use your creativity, go out and lead, do the things that really need it. So that's the kind of balance, and that's the balance we want within our buildings, right? We want them to feel empowered, but we also want them to feel engaged and understand. So hopefully that got at how we share. Obviously, you'll see in our sharing with our community, you'll see Erica sharing an SEL story and a fit story every time one of the communications comes out as well.
Just another observation, having 2 children who've gone through middle school and high school, how important it is at the elementary school level to kind of get these skills and awareness of SEL kind of at that early age so they can hopefully grow with it and not try to have to pick it up kind of later in their education cycles.
Very true observation. That's why I gave the example of at the younger ages, that's when you will see some more of the direct instruction, right? It's a really deliberate instruction because that's when the foundation is set.
Great. Anything else? All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. 2 more items. Both of these were kind of carryover from our committee of the whole in January that was COVID out. Is that right? So we moved those to this month's meeting. So the first one is an update on the progress of Vision 2022. Dr. Schuler.
Great, thank you. This is going to be a joint effort with a number of members of our senior leadership team contributing. So just by way of really quick context, the board has moved into this school year, established a new strategic plan, Vision 2022 plan, and that plan had a number of targets or items that we were going to focus on, and so we had designated for January Committee of the Whole to bring the board an update on progress in each of the areas within the Vision 2022 plan. There's a lot, and so we're going to go through some of this kind of quickly to move through all of it, but please know, certainly at any point we can stop, move back, spend more time with something, or if there's one topic in particular that at a future meeting or future committee of the whole meeting you want to spend a little bit more time with, we can, but I think the goal for this update is just to kind of give you a big picture update of where we are with all of this, and I'm incredibly proud of I think the updates that you're going to hear. It reflects a lot of good, meaningful work that's happening within the district. I think as Dr. Sloggy said, around social emotional learning. Certainly, we've got areas where we can continue to get better as a school district, but I think what you're going to see reflected in this work is an awful lot of really good, solid progress in areas of the strategic plan. So, Faith?
All right, great.
So it's going to be a whole team effort, and we'll kind of be passing this around. But what we want to do tonight in Vision 2022, if you look at the very first slide, so doing student learning, just every single slide that we're going to talk about has the same format to it. That on the left-hand side, we've got plans for 2018-19. If you recall, that is from our planning document where we took what we wanted to accomplish by 2022 and broke it into 4-year components so that we were sure that we weren't all deciding something major for an elementary school team, or that we weren't all going to do something that impacts the budget greatly all in 1 year, and to make sure that we were on steady pilot to get that done. So that left-hand column is just what we had said that we would accomplish during the school year and what would be done. And you'll see some of our standards are really light, and some of those pieces are heavy. That is by design, because we can't do all of these things simultaneously. So I'll start with just talking about curriculum and learning experiences. We said we do social studies. We're well on track to be able to do that. We had said we needed to look at high school final exams. We do not know back then that we would have a calendar change, but that's also given us more opportunity to talk about that. And we continued the work with all of our fit pieces and our trials with that as well. If you move on, one of the big pieces that we pushed is differentiation and personalization, and what those components are. Dreambox, if you recall, is and the Whittier video shared a little bit about that. That's the software that we purchased for our elementary grades to be able to differentiate. I looked it up at 5 o'clock today. We've had 290,694 lessons completed this school year on Dreambox, so it's definitely being used. With middle school math, I've been meeting with all of the math departments regularly, 3 times a year so far, to improve our math programs at the middle school. And then you all heard about the John Spencer keynote, which is about personalization and empowerment. There were lots of great reviews about those pieces. And then he did breakout sessions with us in January. So it's part of Week of Learning, and we brought it back after that. All right, social.
All right. Great to have an opportunity to speak about it again. So obviously, the plans for 2018-19, SEL standard implementation in C12, that was really coming off of last year. So looking at the social emotional standards and how they roll into our day. But big focus really developing a district-wide SEL framework and vision. We certainly have just completed that work and finalized those components. I'll be presenting them tomorrow to our VOE team, but we'll also obviously be presenting those to all of you at the end of the year, our framework. We've already had throughout the year multiple professional involvement offerings that support SEL implementation, but we've agreed upon 5 key components within our framework: relationships, mindset, learning, emotional wellness, and behavioral wellness. We have trained our principals, our senior leadership team, our directors, all on the purpose behind the SEL framework. And right now, we've identified our priorities for the following year as well within our SEL subcommittees, both at the elementary and the secondary level. So there's a lot of good work going within our goal plan, and really, really good progress that aligns with our plans going out.
I'm going to take back to the next one that we're talking about contextualized learning and what those pieces look like. So we are really in the planning phases of this right now. We're exploring what high school internships would look like, exploring what middle school electives would look like. We want to visit other districts. We are looking at different possibilities, but that wasn't a major push this year, other than to explore and to look at that. The next piece I'm so excited about future communication trends. So we've been spending quite a bit of time thinking about what this communication means and what that means for the future, and Our kids have got to be able to create videos, our kids have got to be able to use all kinds of media to hear their voice and get their voice across. So we've done some pretty good work with that. We've started a district small committee, which will soon be expanding to that. My hope is that we're going to write a framework for all the way from kindergarten through 12th grade that uses common terms and instructional strategies to really help our students know the ins and outs of communicating and crafting with their peers. This is also some exciting work to be able to work with diversity and to look at what culturally responsive teaching looks like. And we've made some insteps with that where I've done a presentation at Wheaton Learning and I had a really large crowd at the last Institute Day and we talked about that. We've begun with a small group of administrators from elementary, middle, and high school to explore what that piece looks like. And then we will be creating a 3-year professional development plan to look at our own instructional strategies and find ways to amplify student voice, to hear their stories, their backgrounds, and their feedback on our impact on instruction. That will work closely with the SEL piece and all of that work, but it also has a significant impact on our instruction. Okay, I'm going to pause and take a breath. We're going around the learning support systems. If there's any questions or things you want me to revisit, I'll do that for student learning, or we'll just keep going. I see nonverbal saying keep going. All right, so learning support systems, multi-tiered systems of support. You've heard me talk about this a lot. We are rethinking our assessments for kindergarten through 8th grade for the next school year, and have been doing a lot of work on that. And then I'm so excited to have special education under my department so that we can do more collaboration and sharing of resources between English learners, special ed, and Gen Ed. And then along with that will be a lot of athletic changes that we started this year will continue next school year. PLCs, we're going to hear a lot about that data in the next meeting when we talk about our February committee of the whole is fit in the PLC process. And we'll be looking at what that piece, how to find that time. The elementary schools are loving the additional time for PLCs this school year, and we've seen some positive impact in the use of that time. I think Chris was also going to give a little bit of an update on micro-credentials.
Yeah, micro-credentials are obviously a part of the learning process for our staff as well. Many times they have an opportunity to take on micro-credentials as a team as well. They all share a common interest. So at this point we have about 200 staff members that are in the process working through micro-credentials. So there's a learning piece there as well. I think it goes in the spirit of PLCs as well. It can also be energized. And I'm up for co-curricular. So big piece for the co-curricular programming. You heard me talk a little bit about before how social emotional learning really ties to co-curriculars when you think about it in the context of having our students connected to school through a co-curricular and through getting the experience that a co-curricular can provide for a student. So a starting point for us really is to analyze how many students, total unique students, are involved in co-curricular activities. We're finalizing the data collection right now. We should have it by the end of February. From that point, once we have that unique data at the high school, this is just at the high school level at this point, we'll be able to make some decisions to analyze our gaps on where are we at and have some comparative pieces. So the first piece is really understanding how many unique students we have involved in co-curricular activity.
Chris, could you just offer us a definition of co-curricular versus extracurricular so we have a good understanding of the difference between the two?
Hope I get this right because we just went through it at class. So for the purpose of the Vision 2022, when we say co-curricular, we are analyzing any outside of the school day activity aligned with the school. So that we are, and for the purpose of this, we're analyzing not only athletic involvement, but we are also analyzing club involvement, arts, all those different pieces that would tie into a student having an outside connection. For the sake of us looking at it through this lens, we're saying any connection that a student would have outside of the school day, whether connected to the school, but it's still connected to the school throughout.
So it is, in that definition of co-curricular, extracurricular is included?
Yes. Yes.
And Faith, I apologize, I do have a question. You're changing what was it? You're changing assessments for 20, oh, let me see. I'm sorry, I wrote it down. Oh, here it is.
Page 5.
Yeah, page 5. You're changing assessment systems for fall of 2019. Do you have any sense now what you're looking at, what will change in a broad sense of the term?
Yes. Right now, we have our local district assessments that we've created. We also have the state tests. We also have a system called FastFord. And we will be, especially at the elementary level, diminishing the amount of times we do a test for every single child during FastFord and relying on some of our own data to do that. And then we're also progress monitoring a lot of our students every 2 weeks. We're going to be using a product through FastMat that allows us to track growth with only having to do that 3 to 5 times a year. So I was calculating just early this morning on the number of hours and days our students, especially in interventions, are going to be given back to instruction. So we're reducing the amount of time on assessment and having some of our assessments multitask and using some of our PLDC data to do that.
And you remain confident that with those changes, the quality of the assessments will not be diminished in any way? I mean, we've received reports that our students, particularly in the elementary level, have improved markedly in math and in reading, which is great. If we get the same report next year, we should have as much confidence in that, in your view, in that report as we do in this report, even though the number of assessments may have been.
Which is more instructional time to deliver those interventions. And our reading coaches will also have more time, and the adaptive test that we're moving to goes up and down based on the student's answers, so that it will be more diagnostic, so that we can decide from that test result which intervention that the student might need, and we've been lacking in that area.
A question on this, the student service learning and then the extracurriculars. When you say you're finalizing data collection on that, how are we learning how much participation we have on the part of high school students in particular in extracurricular and co-curricular activities?
Just want to make sure I heard the question. How are we gathering the data? Right. Yeah, so truth be told, it's quite laborious piece because right now our student information system doesn't collect all of that for us, right? So Julie Ozenkowski, our data department, has worked with our high school, some of our high school leaders to have a process where if a kid's in a club, they're filling out a roster. The kids on teams, so they really are almost doing it manually. They're using some Google stuff in there as well. But truthfully, that's why there's kind of almost that time piece, because there is a process of gathering it all and compiling it all right now. It's being handled manually.
Question related to that, we want to see our high school students being involved in things outside of the classroom, but there are an awful lot of our students who are involved in a lot of things that have absolutely nothing to do with our schools, which are also very valuable experiences for them. Is there any way for us to collect information on that? And that obviously means increasing the kids.
Yeah, great question, and a point that's already kind of been brought up as we started these conversations with our schools. And we certainly are going to look into that, because we definitely recognize that there is some valuable work happening outside of stuff that's not connected to schools, and we don't want to discourage our students as well. So I think that will be almost that human element of it as we look at our first set of data coming through. If we see a low number or something like that, there's going to be some reason behind it. So until we see that first kind of data piece coming out, that may be a secondary collection that we may do or look at later. But certainly I echo your sentiments, knowing that there are kids involved in stuff that's not connected to the school. It's very valuable for them, and that is keeping them connected and experience. So.
One more thing I want to add to that. So I think the interest is going to be looking at the situations where perhaps we have a student that's not engaged in something in school, and I think that's an important question to ask them. So I think our sense, and I think the board has found when you go and do chat with boards, that students talk to you regularly about the opportunities in our high school and how important they are to them, which my sense is there's heavy involvement. I want to make sure that there's not heavy involvement by a smaller pocket of students, that that every student has at least one engagement opportunity in an extracurricular activity. That's what's tied to the literature around college and career readiness. It's not whether a student is involved in 8 activities, is each student involved in at least 1 or 2 extracurricular opportunities. So I think that's our goal in terms of tracking is, we don't really, I shouldn't say we don't care, but if we're not concerned with numbers 2 through 10, we're concerned with every student getting to 1 or 2.
The next one is on the concept of universal access. Again, we've talked about that for the last couple of years. You'll hear more about it again in 2 weeks as well. But again, we use this information that we have on how staff are using the devices, or interpreting how they use the devices. We look at the actual data on the devices being used, and we've started to look at. This year was the year we started to look at leaving devices home to students at the elementary level. We've done it in the middle and high school. Right now, the biggest statistic is probably data usage on amount of devices is pretty consistent. We hit that 60 to 70% usage on a daily basis of those, but I think the nice number is that there's an increase in minutes being used on a daily basis. So people who need a device, 60 to 70% of them are being used, but the amount of time kids are spending on those devices are going up slightly, it's a slight tick. And then this year with the elementary, the ACERs that we refreshed, currently we have 75 families who've taken advantage or who've reached out. We did a kind of a targeted approach that first, Dr. Slaggy and I, with the elementary principals to say, let's identify classrooms and grade levels where those are being utilized, and they want to do an outreach to, in the evenings with families, so it wasn't just if anyone needed a device. We kind of did that targeted this first year go around.
Question on that. The comment about the fact that we remain constant on the level of during the school year, that implies one of two things to me, that we've either peaked out, we have the right number of devices, or that we are limited because of the number of devices we have. And can you give me a little insight to that?
I would say we probably have found the accurate. Again, that's more of my personal thing talking with districts where people are the only comparison is a 1-to-1. And that the devices in 1-to-1 in most situations, they say the devices are used maybe 30%. That's the top 30% of the day. Our devices, the ones that we have, are 60% of them are turned on during the day, and the minute tick has gone up. That information, the usage information, along with the universal access survey that the staff replied, there was one building who has tried multiple different ways to distribute their devices, ways that the staff wanted everything. They're the only ones that said that they needed more, and it really is more of the way they're probably sharing or have their devices organized. The rest of the buildings are very few people, a very low percentage, under 1 to 5%, a little bit higher in some that say, they get to every often that they need a device and can't get a hold of one. And sometimes that can be logistical. It's not that a device is not being used, because we can show that 30% are available. Sometimes it's just a location or second floor to first floor. So I would lean more toward I think we have an appropriate number, but not to say we can go up if there were more. Make that sense.
We're going to see a little bit more specific data around that at the February committee of the whole.
The next slide, I want to give a shout out to Lindsay Meeker, who's actually in the audience tonight. She's doing a great job directing the English Learner Program. And what we've specifically been working on is a new delivery model which involves co-teaching, and we've provided a lot of training this year. Lindsay's been going out to the schools and subbing classrooms, modeling, giving all kinds of different instruction on how that looks. And we're doing that at 2 separate schools. But I'm also pleased to report that isn't on the slide, we're doing that with special education and talking about those co-teaching, because co-teaching is just what is really good co-teaching. It isn't or special ed, and we're looking at combining ways of how we support and help the delivery of our programs.
All right, this one's mine. Obviously, one of the things that makes this slide pretty important is we see in the state of Illinois we're losing the number of teaching candidates that are out there. So one of the things we're looking at, if you look at the second column, is Wheaton Warrenville School District is a great brand. As the teaching supply goes lower, we need to go out and start recruiting some of these teachers to come here. We've had a couple from Indiana and Iowa, actual education majors, ask us to come to their job fair. So we're sending people out of state and in-state to go out and target good teachers. You noticed in the fall we're in the mid-90s in keeping and retaining our teachers, which is really good. We want to continue to do that, and we're just looking for different ways that we can go out and find some diverse teachers and then find the best teachers at these universities. And when the job's open, be able to say, all right, here you go, here's 12 that we found through all these college searches. These are good people to start with. It's hard when you see the resumes, it's easier when you meet the people in person. So that's kind of one of the things we're doing that's maybe a little bit different than I want to share.
So 2 questions, kind of in my business, we're doing exactly the same thing in terms of going to colleges and kind of recruiting. I think that's a great move on our part, especially with, as you mentioned, our brand, the challenges we have. Second question is really vague. I'm going to give you a heads up, and maybe we can cover this back at the end. Now that we've covered kind of the student learning components of this, I'm curious if you could foresee in the next year or 2 any kind of curriculum changes as opposed to just kind of tweaks to how we work within the classroom or how we do things from an assessment standpoint. But do you envision any coming to the board in the next couple of years with, we want to change the curriculum, we want to add this curriculum to middle school level, or something in one of the things you said that made me wonder about that? So that's a complicated question. If we can answer it now, or we can come back to it at the end, whichever's easier.
Some of the middle school electives, if we're looking at redesigning those and looking at a different curriculum, I was just talking to the high school English department today, and while we've looked at that somewhat recently, there are some kind of major changes that we may want to make in the speech and communication pieces to include more of production and using technology to do that, which wasn't something that we looked at prior to that. Writing and the message production piece, we have some things in place, but that is an area of great opportunity, and now we're working on bringing all of that by the time we're done with Vision 2022. When I speak to the board the next time around the committee as a whole, I am wanting to explore what I believe needs to be the next components of fit, and what we need to do not only in the curriculum areas, but also our systems of management on what that will look like, so that we can be poised to be more agile in our, as everything is exponentially changing faster and faster, a movement more toward frameworks, which I'm lucky I started that way with reading and math, so we can do those pieces, but also empowering students and teachers in their own learning so that we can more quickly react to the changes. So maybe that's not enough specifics for you, but you'll see continuing more of that trend of that deeper knowledge by having students compare different things, draw patterns, and explain, and look at whether evidence is in place or not to back up their opinion. And we see more and more of that with the social studies piece. But our fit vision is still great, but we have to think about those next components, and that's a large part of my presentation in 2 weeks. not going to read through every single bullet point, but just maybe point out a few highlights. So we did develop that community calendar. It's been very well received throughout the community, working with some targeted groups. In fact, a group from Windsor Park came to the Wheaton North Orchestra concert just this past winter in January, and so, not this past winter, this winter, and they had a really, really great time. So we're really trying to identify very specific opportunities for maybe some people who don't typically step in our schools to come and engage with our students. And so we're really looking forward to expanding that relationship. And then one other highlight Dr. Schuler mentioned earlier this evening is scheduling our town halls. We are very especially excited, while budget and finance can often be riveting, we are especially excited about our safety town halls. We're putting a lot of time and energy into working with our Wheaton Police Department, Warrenville Police Department, and Wheaton Fire. We will all be collectively sharing information with the community about our approach to safety in the community and in our schools, and then really allowing the community, parents, public to ask questions they may have, and then also offer feedback based on what they've seen and heard.
Good question. Good question on those. Are we going to videotape those or store them somehow? Facebook Live, whatever?
Yes, we will film. I expect that we will probably film the Tuesday night one. I expect there to be a larger crowd at that one, and actually the city of Wheaton is going to film that so that we can splice together a video about that, and they will do that for us. So we got a little slow in starting on our parent workshops, but so we will end up with 5 for the school year. We're really excited. Next week we have sold out 2 theaters at Studio Movie Grill for about 500 tickets to show Life the movie. It really talks about the impact on social media in our lives, and how together that we can create balance for our children and families. It is unavoidable in this day and age. Everyone has a cell phone. You cannot survive without one. A mobile device, and almost everyone is on some type of social media platform. How do we live with that reality but also have balance in our lives? And so we're bringing back a really incredible social media, digital media expert, Liz Repkin, and she's going to facilitate a discussion following the film, and the discussion part will be on our Facebook Live, on the live stream, so that parents who weren't able to make it to the film or weren't able to get tickets because it reached capacity can still watch that discussion and follow along and hear some great feedback and strategies from parents. Actually, on Friday, the first FIT commercial is in production stages. I'm getting some footage at Westbrook in first grade. Faith mentioned contextualized learning earlier, and so we are going to, through video, explain to the community what contextualized learning is. And the first grade team at Westbrook has developed this incredible space day experience for the students, and they're going to go from room to room and experience what it's like to be an astronaut and be in space. And I'm not just buttering them up because one of them is going to get stuck with my oldest next year at Westbrook, but they are an incredible team, and I'm excited to highlight that as our first FIT commercial. And we are still looking to have our goal of 3 to 4 completed for this school year. So in terms of developing a structured format for gathering feedback from students, staff, and parents, we looked at, is there anything in existence now that we can utilize rather than reinventing the wheel? And 5 Essentials is there. And so our schools have done a really good job of, all of them have hit the 20% parent participation rate, which means you have to hit 20% of your parents to respond and participate in the survey in order to have that reported publicly and receive those results on the state, through the state report card. Did I say that right, Faith? Okay. So all of our schools have hit that, and so we're really looking forward to getting that feedback both from our students and staff, but also parents. And
we have heard nothing but positive feedback about the District 200 newsroom. So prior to this school year, we had, anytime we pushed out a board highlights, it was housed on one section of our website. Anytime a Focus on Learning story was pushed out, it was on another section of our website. If Dr. Schuler put out a message, it was on one section of our website. Now all of our important stories are in one central location, and I'm really able to track the number of views, minutes spent reading, I think just in the last 30 days, we've had about 5,000 views on that newsroom, and quite honestly, in the last 30 days, I have not posted a ton of new content, so that's really encouraging that people are utilizing that. But more importantly, what I really like, and I've heard from our parents, some of whom are very involved, and some maybe who aren't as engaged, but that when you take a story from the newsroom and you post it to our social media, it looks like a very professional news article, and it catches people's attention more than probably it did before. And so I do believe that we are getting an increased readership of our stories that we put out through the use of that newsroom, plus it's also one central location.
Before we move to the financial, a couple items that I kind of followed what Brad talked about, and the, kind of putting some of these together. Number one, the quality of our board meeting presentations is so much better than it was a year ago, 2 years ago. Just this, whatever we put it on now, that we didn't in the past, as I observe those, if I'm not at a meeting, it's just night and day how good it is. Number one. Number two, we talk about, individuals from Windsor Park coming and doing things. I don't know that we give enough credit at times to all the people involved with the incubator program, whether it's the judging or it's the participation of coaches and so on. Because I know a lot of people that are participating in those and they really love it. And I was really happy to see when we walked around tonight that was on one of the boards in here about the incubator program at 5th grade level. And I think that's outstanding. And when we talk about curriculum, where we're going, I think that's one of the changes that I think has happened probably over the last few years. I mean, let's face it, the incubator program didn't exist 3-4 years ago, and now we're teaching here. But the other thing that I think if I were to look at down the road of what I'd like to make sure we get into, and maybe we are already, is the whole world of artificial intelligence. It's getting so much press now. There's a big federal project and so on. So would you like to elaborate on how we're going to deal with artificial intelligence? This was
already in the slide deck for 2 weeks from now, and some of the data looking into some of the jobs that will be replaced by artificial intelligence and what that means, and kind of the skills I believe our students and, quite frankly, our country will need to develop to manage and empower and think about what is still our right to decide versus those pieces. We saw President Trump came out with his proposal on the 5 pillars of artificial intelligence this week, and what that will look like. So I do have some of the data and also a video clip to talk about that and what I think the impact means for our curriculum.
Great. Thank you.
Finance and facilities, kindly, I don't want to steal from my revenue presentation. So the first one is really about the planning that goes on relative to our board goals of balanced budget and meeting our board fund balance policy. And we do that by updating our forecast model, which was presented in May. It's obviously scheduled because I think in January, but let's hold it out. So tonight, I just want to touch on the health and assistance of the finance committee. We had a great discussion as we went through the assumptions. Each year, the administration will put together assumptions for the finance committee to review, and we have great dialogue and great conversations, and we make modifications of those assumptions based on our conversations with the finance committee. So appreciate that input, and we'll present that here later tonight. Moving on to facilities, again, great help from the Board Facilities Committee relative to identifying projects and working with JR and myself and Dr. Suler as we work through the projects and trying to get those prepared. Boards saw a list of those projects back in December, and we got approved from the board to release those bids at the meeting last month, and we're starting to to see those coming already. I should also mention, I think Mr. Paulson asked how many buildings we were doing doors at. It was 8. We have 8 with ROE permits. There's actually 12 buildings we're working in. So a lot of good progress being made there. We also have more bids going out for roofing and flooring, which are the major projects we talked about. So the board should look to see those bids coming here in the future as well.
The next slide is again on the master tech plan, which again you'll get an update on that in 2 weeks. But the big things for the past one is we did do the core switches at the SSC Apollo. Those are where our major connections are for our main site and DR site, and then 2 larger refreshes of the Acer Chromebooks last year with new Dell ones in the elementary laptop. But you'll hear more about this next week.
Final on the finance side, so one of our targets was to develop a model for private fundraising to support some of our facility work. I think this kind of had its origin, some discussion around some work to support Jefferson, but we have been able to take that concept and expand it out to a few different areas. So the Student Excellence Foundation is still looking at a dedicated capital campaign to support that project or some of the elements associated with it. We have 2 elementary schools that have done a fundraising campaign to replace a playground within the school, and then we have 11 buildings that have a targeted fundraising campaign to make some form or function of improvement within their library learning center. So again, we're not necessarily attacking those at the same pace that we had proposed doing them in the previous referendum question, but you cannot go to an elementary school without seeing some of those targeted improvements, and that's all happening through private fundraising. That's not happening through district dollar.
Yeah, one comment I'd like to make on the Student Excellence Foundation. I understand I missed it unfortunately. It was a great event over the weekend, and it sounded like a lot of the board members as well as many parents and so on participated. It sounded like a very nice, successful program. One item on the financing that I just wanted, a big picture issue again. I think again, I'm going to say Brad and I first got elected 8 years ago, was it? 6 years ago, whatever. It seems like a lifetime. But no, I'm just kidding. But I think we were faced with some serious challenges, and I think over that 6-year period, we have really become what I feel a self-sustaining financial model. And we did, every time I turn around, I see strikes about, whether it's a surrounding district or Denver or whatever. And I see people in some of the FOIA requests ask about, components of compensation, which are all part of the big picture of how we operate our business. And you can't look at one isolated piece of that without looking at the whole. And that whole is, we got a staff that's, I guess happy, a board that's happy to, pay what we can, and to operate successfully within the financial models we're dealing with. And I think, again, one of the challenges we looked at, 6 years ago was, funding things, and we tried a big referendum and failed, and now we're trying to work that model out. And it seems like we're making progress on that. So I'm really, I feel really good about that financial program that we're in, and the big picture of it, and how we're trying to solve it, and where we're going with it. And I think Dr. Schuler and Mr. Farley have been great, leaders in that field. So I appreciate that. So I just want to put that in. Thank you.
Yep.
The closing slide is just to look at our student learning progress, what we were talking about this year and looking forward at the additional work. And there is a lot of progress that we're making, as we talked about. I also feel that there's some ongoing work that isn't getting quite enough attention. We're very leading in the student learning and curriculum department. Some of the things that I'm not finding enough time to do are classroom walkthroughs, more coordination between all the different components, and some of the looking of our current resources and schedules so that I can find more time to be doing that. As we look toward next year, when I need to be developing internships, pathways, credit opportunities in the high schools, looking at the K-12, writing a message production piece, looking at monitoring and changing all of the assessments, developing the plans on culturally responsive teaching. We're really looking at, and some of that is by design, because we want to be that way, but as this was 2 years ago, we had 3 administrators supporting general education curriculum and instruction. We are now at 1 teacher coordinator to do that. So we've gone down less than a third of staff that we had to do that. With all of the work that is going on at the high school and the coordination pieces, we are looking at wanting to add a position. It's kind of the position we had this year when Dan left right in the midst of board. We didn't have a whole lot of great applicant interest at that time of the year, so we are looking at reinstating, possibly reinstating that position. And one of the things that we were considering doing if we do move forward with that is have it be a 12-month position so that we can look at summer school options and some of those pieces. Because right now it is only really over the summer to do any of those planning pieces. And we have quite a bit of work to do to get where we want to be in 2022.
Any other questions from the board? So when did we approve this in 2022? Last summer?
We go to the summer and going into the summer.
So basically, we're about 7 months into this. This is an observation, incredible amount of work that's gone into this. And my observation was kind of like what you just summarized with it. It's thick, it's half as thin, with a lot of big, great things ahead of us. Great progress over a short period of time, so thank you.
Last piece, thank you for the feedback on that. The faith ended with, again, that's obviously not an action item for tonight, but I am just forecasting for the board that we are not looking to really add a curriculum position. We had intended to come into this school year with that curriculum position that we had for the high school level, and again, just based on transition, Mr. Corntower going to Warrenville South, which was a great opportunity for him to fill that position. We're operating 1 short this year, and yet I think doing a lot of work. But as you look at some of the secondary focus things, we are going to need to reinstate that position for next year. And again, I will bring the data as we look at it, but we still operate incredibly lean administratively, and our ratio of administrators to students and the budgeting component for that, we're by no means heavy in terms of administrative costs, but I want to make sure that the same feeling you had tonight about work that's been done so far, as we get another 7 months out, another 12 months out, I want the board to continue to feel good about progress that we're making, and I think that that's going to be difficult to do if we don't put that research back in. So again, be happy to answer any individual questions, but we will bring that forward as a request.
So you're basically filling a vacant slot. Okay, third in here, oral report is the financial forecast.
Go that way. Mr. Farley's going to go up to the podium because I think, as he's going to do when we do the town hall meeting, he's going to tap dance his way through the 5-year forecast model to add a little additional spin to it. So, Mr. Farley.
Thank you. As I mentioned during our 2022 discussion, thanks again to the Finance Committee from the Board of Finance Committee, and we had great dialogue and great conversation as we start to build this model that we do every year. It is usually presented at the committee of the whole meeting, but obviously we had to cancel that and move it to tonight, so it is a little bit later in the season. But before we dive into it, I wanted to just run through some of the fiscal metrics that are important to the Board of Education, things that we put on our website that we feel are important to share. First is about how much we spend per student. We are under the state average, have been consistently under the state average. This information is on the state report card that was just issued back in October, and it does trail a little bit behind by about a year, I believe it is correctly. The state report card data, but we are, again, below the state average spending. We had this discussion as part of our audit process. Our fund balance has been up this year to 31.9%. That's even after making transfers last year. So our overall, we're within our overall 25 to 40% range for our fund balance that is per board policy. If you recall back to last spring, the Standard & Forbes did increase our credit rating from AA to AA plus. State Board of Education designation as far as our financial situation and financial recognition, which it has been consistently for the last few years. And it's not official until the state releases it for last year, but that's how it's recorded in our AFR, and we expect that to continue. And then finally, this is the 9th year of a balanced budget. Mr. Matheson had mentioned where the Board of Education has done a lot of work after harder financial times to get the budget in line, and it has stayed consistently in line over that time here. Jumping out of the model, just a quick refresher about this model for the board and the community. It's a tool that we have used for a number of years. Financial planning allows for financial planning. It allows us to put in a lot of different scenarios if we need to. It's very helpful during bargaining, which we used for last year. It helps with budget preparation as well as distribution and other information. We pull a lot of data and charts off this for other reports that we do for the Board of Education. So 5CAST is a very powerful model. A lot of school districts in the area and the state use this model. It's not only looking forward, we also put in a lot of data elements prior. We have 5 years of audited and annual financial report data. All of it is driven right out of our general ledger. The fiscal year we are in, FY19, the budget year, is always the jumping off point for our models and projections moving forward. So we pull data right out of our general ledger into the model, and that's, again, our starting point moving forward. We pull in all our tax levy extension and rate information, EAV, enrollment, and district assumptions. Again, the last part of the key part is we talk through this, go through this model and project out. Again, just start off with the budget. This is our FY19 budget. As I mentioned, this is kind of the leaping off point. For the purpose of the model, this is our operating budget and does not include the IMRF budget, but we've put noted at the bottom because of the way we calculate our fund balance policy. It does not include IMRF. So as you can see, the revenues, the majority of the budget comes from local resources, property taxes, and other local costs, including fees. Then we have general state aid, which is about 7.2%, other state aid is about 4%, and federal is about 4%. One of the biggest drivers on that local resource as far as tax levy is relative, each year we keep an eye on the consumer price index, and that's why the timing of this report is usually in January, because we find out in mid-January what our CPI is going to be for the upcoming levy year. So the timing of that release is always important. In the last couple of years, you'll see it's been about 2.1%. This year, the CPI came out at 1.9%. So it's averaging and hovering right around 2% over the last 2 or 3 years. For the purpose of the model, and what we talked about is one of our assumptions moving forward, we're using 2% as a CPI moving forward. So in the model for our tax levy purposes, we're using the 2% CPI as an average going forward. The 1.9% is built into the model. Once we remove that number, we inserted that into the model in the middle of January, and so that number is already included in the model. The other function of our tax levy process is new growth in the district, and as you'll see, this model shows a little bit of history in blue, where we've had some new growth. In 2016, we had a couple of TIFs that ended. 2017, we saw some of the Amazon property come on the tax rolls. Based on information that we received and as part of our levy process, as far as what we anticipate for new growth from our local township assessors, we built in $33 million, and then we leveled that off back to $25 million, which is what we anticipate seeing over the next few years, and then it jumps up quite a bit in 2022, and that's again another TIF that is set to expire, TIF 2 in Wheaton right now, and we had a TIF meeting recently with the city of Wheaton, and I believe that TIF right now is tracking at about $40 million of new growth that would come on the tax rolls based on today's information. So we have inserted that increase into the model moving forward. We continue to monitor that. There were some PTABs and some property tax assessment issues going on within that TIF that hopefully are getting buttoned up here soon. So we'll have better information, but we've got that number as a holding spot, and then we drop it back to 25 million. Again, there's always developments that can pop up and things that can happen within the district, but we feel we're on the other side
Before we leave that page, Bill, I got a question. That big jump in there, that 60 million, how does that affect the individual taxpayer? You're using the word TIF, okay? And as I understand it, the TIF, basically the city borrowed money at some point to do something. And the TIF money, the tax increment that grew because of that is being used to pay off bonds or something that were used to develop, for instance, part of downtown Wheaton. Okay, and so when the TIF ends, which is what we're seeing here, the individual taxpayer's tax bill doesn't really go up. It's just that the bond is paid off, and therefore our share, or all taxing authorities, get a higher percentage of that now what was formerly paying off debt. Is that a fair?
Yeah, and when TIFs go into place, and they're usually in place for 23 years, the EAV that is available to the school district is frozen. All of the tax rate that goes against the new or growing EAV is what goes into the TIF proceeds to help pay off the bond, usually bond debt that the city incurs to do their projects, or the projects within the TIF to improve the lighting or whatever, however you want to reference the TIF, how the TIF is improved. But really the impact of the taxpayer, because of the way the property tax caps work, we still receive the CPI over the prior year. So really the TIF does shift the burden back to the local taxpayers because that EAV is not now accessible to the school district. Once it comes back onto the tax rolls, then that should help a little bit. I'm sure it's not incrementally a lot, but it definitely will help because now that EAV is participating in the overall increase each year on the levy. I don't know if that answers your question.
Okay, but the dollars that TIF was used for were paying off debt, and that debt is done now. So therefore, the other taxing, the park district, the city, the school district, gets that money that was used to pay off the bonds. Isn't that how we get more money as a district?
We get more money based on the improvement within the TIF. So if the TIF was worth 11 million when it went into place, and now it's worth 50 million, that new growth, remember new growth, every $1 million of new growth is about $43,000 to the school district. So when the EAV, which is improved over time, generally because TIFs are set up to improve the property within the TIF. So as that TIF goes up, every $1 million is about $43,000 to us as a school district. So when that property comes back onto the tax rolls, as it were, then we receive the benefit of that new growth or the EAV increasing.
Okay. I don't think the individual taxpayer feels the real pain on that, though. In other words, I think one of the TIFs expiring is where the Eddie Rouge property used to be, that is now a condo development by the train station. I think that's one of these that are expiring, or it might be City Hall, or where the police station was, or, used to be and now is a parking lot, things like that. So those properties that were, the condos that were there are now paying, they're paying taxes all along. But it's been used to pay debt down up till now. And now it's going to go on to the, the other taxing bodies, such as that. So again, it's not going to really, that tax is going to just be redirected and we get a big jump here because of it.
Correct. Individual taxpayers within the TIF, there's no difference. But for how TIFs work as far as when the new AV comes back on the tax rolls, that's a benefit to the entire school.
Okay, that's good.
Other assumptions for local property, local CPTRT, we're keeping that flat, and then all other local revenue we're keeping flat. Fees, we're still having that discussion, so we're keeping that at the current level. Any impact of fees generally is not going to have a profound impact on the revenue, so we do keep that flat.
And Bill, with respect to the corporate personal property replacement tax, there's no more adjustments needed because of wasn't it several years ago there was some overpayment of those taxes to taxing bodies, and
that's been taken.
That's all been taken care of.
So that's the assumptions for our local share. So moving on to state, we're under the evidence-based funding model now. So this is a little different. Again, this is a shift from how general state used to be calculated and how state schools were funded throughout the state. Now we're under the evidence-based model. We're going to be entering the third year already, which is hard to believe, but each of the last 2 years, we have received increases in that line item of around 300, 350,000, so we booked in $300,000 increases for the next couple of years. As the EDF plays out, we'll continue to monitor what happens at the state level and see where that goes, but we put in what we believe to be a number that's relatively conservative to what we've seen over the last couple of years, or in line with what we've seen the last couple of years. Beyond that, we're going to wait and see where the state goes with the model. Other state categorical grants, that's really just now transportation, tuition, driver's ed, those we've kept at current budget levels. And then federal level revenue, we've also projected that to continue at the current budget level. So for the most part, the revenues we're keeping relatively flat over the time period. Some of the items that we have, we don't really see some growth.
Didn't we also, I know on the accrual versus cash, but we were also kind of catching up over the last few years with the state that had been delayed because of the budget, the whole budgeting process at the state level. Now that we've caught up and we've changed this evidence-based model, we're getting paid more currently.
Yes, it's, we still have one payment lagging, but the impact of that lag is not as profound as that last categorical payment that lagged in the last fiscal year, which was under the old categorical system. So that money finally caught up, but we're now to a point where they have made the first categorical payment, so that's the September payment. The December payment hasn't arrived yet, but they're ahead of schedule from where they were last year.
Yeah, and part of the reason we had a positive revenue over expense last year in the audit was because the state caught up.
Yes.
And we've not, I mean, that probably meant we got more than 1 year's revenue in that period because of the delay, and then it caught up. Now we're going back in reality to a flat level of 1 year.
I think what Bill's saying though is in theory, there is still one more opportunity for a catch-up. So the state, if they were to make all 4 payments for this year in a timely manner that were recognized, you would actually still have 1 lag payment from last year. So you could have 1 more year where that, not to the extent that it did last year, but where you have a little bit of an overage if they're completely caught up.
Okay, but we're estimating 1 year's worth in these projections. So we could have a catch-up year of some amount, 1/4 that number. Okay.
That number's about $1.7 million. So the fourth quarter payment from last year came after our 60-day accrual period, and we received the first payment, so we've received 2 this fiscal year when we budget. Again, just some revenue sensitivity numbers I mentioned. One of these, for this consumer price index, every 1% is about $1.34 billion. The new property I mentioned is $43,000 for every $1 million. And then our tax collection rate, which again, we're in DuPage County, we're fortunate we have a pretty high tax collection rate. Every 1/10% that we don't receive is about $134,000. And then our categorical payments is estimated each categorical, as I mentioned, also is about $1.7 million that we receive when we book for 4 of those in the fiscal year. Any other questions on revenues?
Wasn't there an announcement today about last year's CPI? I heard that in the news. It was one of the lowest years, or maybe it's just this last month, I don't know.
The CPI actually came out yesterday for January, and it was 1.6%.
Oh, just for January?
Yeah, not the lowest. We just received the January numbers. It always is a couple weeks into the year, but it was 1.6 million, or excuse me, 1.6%. But we did it last fiscal year 1.9.
So these projections are projecting some increase in CPI.
2%.
And what was last year's CPI increase?
For the levy year 2018 that we levied in November was 2.1%. The levy we will do in November of 2019 will be 1.9%. And then we've got 2%.
And this is predicated on what, 2%?
Yes.
Okay.
Well, we've got 1.9 built in for the December 18 or 19 levy, and then 2% beyond that.
In this budget?
Yes. Moving on to expenditures, we talked about staffing earlier. Obviously, salaries and benefits make up a major portion of our people-driven business. Purchase services is a little over 12%. Supplies, 4%. Capital, 2%. Other objects, 4%, 9%, and then very small, or 1% relation difference. And again, just mentioning this is the budget for FY19 for expenditures and includes all of our operating funds with the exception of the IMRF budget, which is also moving on to salaries and staffing, the assumptions we use for teachers moving forward for fiscal years 20 through 22, which are under contract, we have it at 2.5% currently. That's based on the contract is structured with blended CPI and the CPI numbers we're using moving forward. Beyond that, we've gone through fiscal year 24, we've got it at 2%. All other staff classified, we have again blended CPI, so we've got them in at 2% moving forward, and administrators at 1.5. One addition to the assumptions that is probably looks new to our two finance committee members, we've continued to look at our enrollment and staffing numbers, and we have built into the model reduction of 5 FTE plan for next year. Again, that will be done through attrition, but we believe that we're at a point in time right now that we have probably be able to reduce our teaching FTE by about 5 FTE based on enrollment assumptions here.
How many FTE do we have in place?
Teachers probably 1,065. Roughly.
So 5, we're reducing 1,065 by 5.
Correct.
So a minute number.
It's a small number. That number about right there. That's about right. Health and dental benefits, we have 3% built into the model for fiscal years 19 through 24. We just got some preliminary information on our healthcare. We're doing very good as a district this year, much better than the previous years. They do look at a couple years, but we feel pretty confident about that 3% number moving forward. We're again benefits of being in a co-op and having some good claims here. We feel that number is pretty solid moving forward. Purchase services, supplies, capital outlay, tuition. And I'll talk a little bit more about capital outlay, but we're keeping spending flat. Food service and custodial outsourcing are tied to CPI. Transportation, we recently opened bids and are still in the process of evaluating that. We've kept that at 3% moving forward based on previous renewals, but we'll know more as we get through the bidding process and bidding evaluation for transportation. Capital spending, I'll mention that. About our capital outlay spending. We're going to increase the model has an increase built in to 4.2% million over 3.2 million this year that was budgeted in our operations and maintenance fund and capital, and then increasing that capital spend for capital projects by $1 million a year through FY23. Conversely, we've got the fund balance transfers for $3 million built into the model for FY20, $2 million in FY21, and $1 million in '22. That was a concept that we've talked to the board about a few times as far as how we get build up our overall spend on capital projects through use of fund balance, which under the board's fund balance policy, we say any excess we can use towards capital work, as well as building our budget up to spend more on capital work going forward. So the concept that we've talked about in the past, we have built into this model.
Bill, just to follow up on that, so we're going to basically find $1 million a year for the next 4 or 5 years out of our operating budget? Is that what I'm reading?
Yes, yes, the model has built in $1 million a year through FY23 in our budget. So in our budget, we will have to find those funds.
So that's work that has to get done. That's not magic, right? Decisions that have to be made. How we spend our money to be able to create that reallocation to buildings.
I think we'll see that in the next page where we're going to be on those. But just to clarify that now, so we're talking about in the fiscal year 20, the number we were projecting under what I'll call the Gambiani or Sherman Burgess program. I'm telling you, that's going to hang in there. But anyway, we were talking about $8 million a year, 70 million a year. So in what we're saying then is that out of operating money, in the first year we're going to use 4.2 of operating money, and then we have to use in effect $3 million to get to the total spend of that 7 out of fund balance. The following year, we're going to take 5.2 out of operations and need to use fund balance again of now 2 million roughly. So that at the end of that, in theory, fifth year, we're going to be self-funding out of operations because we've now used up fund balance, basically, that $8 million a year. And when we look at this next page, we're going to see that that may not work totally in those far out years. Is that a fair statement? But we'll get there. But again, we're talking about utilizing, spending $8 million a year, $7, $8 million a year for the 5-year period to deal with things that we have not already fixed, but those that were, many of which were in the $80 million that were in the budget, or the referendum budget, I'll call it.
So I've said this before, but if we're able to get up to $7 or $8 million a year on our buildings, based on my experience, I would probably guess we're probably in the top 20 in the state and the amount of money that's spent on 750 some odd. That's a lot of money to allocate. That's a great target, but we just need to acknowledge that there's not too many school districts that spend that much money and allocate that much money every year.
Just additional assumptions, there's no legislative changes in school funding, and given what happened recently with the EBF, I don't anticipate that. No change in the property tax cap laws. TRS pension shift is always has been out there for quite a while, and it's been pretty quiet. We include known and projected retirements in the future, and with hiring those staff back in at $50,000, and then the FY19 budget comes in accurate for the purpose of our projections. So this is the aggregate revenue and expenditure page that the board's used to looking at. So taking all of these assumptions that we did both on the revenue and expenditure side, this gives us an indication, and again, these are not hard numbers, this is what is absolutely going to be budgeted numbers, but it gives us a good basis for planning and moving forward as far as where we're going to be. And as you can see, if you focus in on that surplus deficit line for our operating budget, you'll see next year we're projecting a slight surplus overall for our operating budget. But then as you move out, as Mr. Matheson mentioned, you'll see that we do start to see some deficits as we're building up those numbers for our capital spend overall. So obviously that is something that we would have to address. Also, if you look below that line, where you can see where we're starting to pull fund balance out, you can see where our fund balance is each year, and now we see it's important as far as our overall fund balance policy. So you see by the time we get into 2022, we're starting to get under that 25% minimum that we threshold that by board fund balance policy we will need to address. So obviously a couple of issues there as we look at this moving forward that we, in order to keep our balanced budget and our fund balance policy that we would have to address. We also, so this is the assumptions based off, this is the report based off the assumptions we presented. We also ran a couple other scenarios, which is a nice feature of this, where we actually dug in and looked at, okay, what happens if we reach into 2021 and we're able to reduce that deficit of $400,000? How does that impact it? So you can see we basically balanced that budget for the fiscal 21 year. That improves 22 and 23 and starts to push out a little bit longer that fund balance low point, but we're still carrying some deficit budgets moving forward. So we also then ran one more scenario where we went in 2022. You can see that had a negative balance that was reduced after we fixed 2021, because again, it always ripples through the model, and the impact of changes or updates. So if we balance out 2022, and then you can see that actually gets us into a positive situation, and the fund balance stays above that 25% line item going forward. So that obviously lays out the challenges ahead that we have to address as far as balancing the budget and making sure that we're maintaining fund balance within our fund balance policy moving forward. So that those additional charts just can kind of illustrate what happens if we when we go in and balance the budget and make those adjustments.
So I want to just clarify, kind of add one last piece. So last year, again, I think to some degree, information taken out of context. When we did these projections and we showed red numbers, I think some pulled the information out of context and suggested that we were going to run deficit budgets, that was a proposed budget. This is scenario planning, right, for the district. Clearly, to honor your policy of a balanced budget every year, the third scenario, where we have adjusted expenditure number 2, that's the scenario we need to get to. And so I think to Brad, the point that you raised before, in order to get to that last chart, what it means is when we get out to fiscal year 2021, we're going to have to make some adjustments in expenditures to the amount of about $430,000, right? We're going to have to dig in and find a way to reduce expenditures by $430,000 in that year. And when we do that, you see then in the following year what it does to the model moving out, because again, the model always assumes that current year budget is your carry forward. So if you reduce expenditures by $400,000, that's going to become your base then for the following year. So the challenge, if all things stay the same, is we got a year where we're going to have to dig into about $400,000. We're going to have another year after that where we've got to dig into the tune of about $800,000 to make all of this work. And again, those are not small numbers, but I do want to remind the board, as you think about a $165 million budget, when we're talking about tuning to that level, we're not talking about wholesale cuts in programs, we're not talking about massive staff reductions. Those are deficits, but I do believe that those are deficits that we'll be able to manage. And there are some scenarios as we get closer to those years that may play out that kind of help us to manage that. And the very last thing I just want to mention, because we talked about it at the facility committee, with the work that's happening this summer, with Jefferson underway, new building replaced, that does shift your Sherman Durgis funding scenario with the work that's happening. We actually reran the model for the facility committee to see what is the true Sherman Durgis target, and we're actually a little heavy at $7.2 million. The true target is about $6.6 million as you rerun the model with those scenarios. So again, just in kind of true to all of our policies, we are carrying a number that's actually a little heavier than what's in the Sherman Durgis target, to the tune of about $500,000. So again, I know we want to be as aggressive as we can with the facility work and those pieces that we're doing, but just there is some flexibility there that I want to mention based on the good work that's already done. So there are red numbers, right? That never, like the greatest of pictures, but I'm going to tell you, compared to last year when we were looking at this is a much improved picture with those red numbers that we see. And again, that is with a commitment to spending over $7 million a year on your critical facility work moving forward. So you think about that over 5 years, 7 times 5, almost $40 million worth of work that's getting chipped away at our buildings, out of our budget, out of accumulated fund balance, without an assumption of going to the taxpayers and asking for any type of referendum or non-referendum borrowing scenario.
So we made some very significant kind of structural changes to our budget to accommodate facilities. So, up until, maybe even 2 years ago, the referendum in 2017, there was strong accusations from our community that we weren't taking care of our buildings or underfunding it. I think with this model following Sherman Durgis, I kind of feel like that argument is gone. We're making huge investments projected over a 5-year period, 6-year period. So, this is just an observation.
One other observation, the whole idea of these projections is to identify areas that we need to look at. I mean, that's the whole purpose of it. And again, just to be clear again, the Jefferson lease payment is in all these projections, the roughly $1 million a year.
It's in the budget. It's because it's being paid out of bonded interest fund. It's not technically on it's incorporated into our budget, but we're paying it out of bonded interest. So it's bonded interest isn't one of the operating funds.
But we're not taxing for it.
Correct.
So, the reality is that our model is doing exactly what it should. It's identifying the areas that we have to be concerned about over that cycle of time. And in general, it's achieving what the facilities committee wanted, has identified as significant improvements, and what the finance committee has said what we're trying to achieve as far as tax, levels and so on. So I think it's the model we wanted to achieve, and it seems to be attainable, I guess, over the next roughly 5 years, and that's the important part, I believe. So, thanks.
Bill, I've got a question, well, several. I'm looking back on our forecast 5 as of October of 2018. And in the line item other in revenue, we had a placeholder for -$1 million for each of those years, and it's not in here now. How did that just disappear?
It did disappear when we were trying to cost out the impact. Basically, when we put in the general state aid number, it's lower by $1 million in the model now. Because again, as I mentioned, the general state aid is going directly into the bonded interest fund, which is not one of our operating funds. So for the purpose of illustrating that last year, it was in there. We showed that there was $1 million reduction in revenues based off of what we had projected originally. Now that $1 million is basically out of the model for good and for general state aid, so it doesn't even appear in that state funding line.
So simply said, to make that clear, we've got so much state aid from the state, and instead of allocating all that to the operational funds, we're putting $1 million of it into the debt service fund, which is being utilized to pay. So therefore, if we used to get whatever, so many million, it's now $1 million less in these projections.
Correct.
In the operational side.
Correct.
And to continue down that trend, again, looking at October numbers, I know that's 3 months ago, but that's the placeholder I've had compared to these numbers. I'm looking at from 2019 to 2023, and as of October, we had almost a $22 million deficit. In that same window on this form, we have a $3.1 million deficit. Where did that $18 million go?
Well, it's basically a function of the model we ran back in, I think it was January. I don't know if we ran a model in October, but we ran a January model, which we presented to the board, and I think we did an update for bargaining purposes. But basically, that model that we were looking at last year took us that operating budget right from 2.2 or 3.2 million up to 7 million. So that was an immediate impact of operational. Instead of having that build up as we're doing now, it took an immediate hit of $7 million or whatever it was for Sherman-Durgis right out of our operational budget. So we had structural deficits put in right away based on going to immediate Sherman-Durgis.
So part of the answer to that, Jim, though, is it's in the use of fund balance to bridge that gap rather than immediately running a huge structural deficit that in the previous model then just carried forward.
And that $21 million I just spoke about, that did not, based on my notes here, did not include Sherman-Durgis allocations, which would, if that were the case, that was going to bump it even higher. So I guess
it did, because in that model, so remember in the model last year, we showed a capital spend in your operating budget equivalent to Sherman-Durgis. That was built into the model a year ago.
There was no consumption of the fund balance.
There was no consumption, but there was an expenditure built in, an expenditure assumption built in equivalent to Sherman during this. So we took you right from where you were in the current year budget, right up to a $7.2 million spend out of the operational budget for capital projects.
But even with the fund balance movement, which is about $5 million, still the numbers aren't jiving for me. I mean, we start out, the document we had, that showed like you said, $21 million deficit, and maybe that did adjust for some Sherman Burgess activity. But to get to these less than red numbers, which I'm looking at, we're only using $5 million of fund balance to offset $21 million deficit. What am I missing, I guess?
We've got $6 million of fund balance for the next 3 years, and then we've got the buildup of operational dollars by $1 million a year that we've incorporated into not only this year's budget, but moving forward those budget years. I don't have an number in front of me.
I think, Jim, maybe if you compare revenue and expense by year, you'll see where some of those numbers are going.
They're pretty equal, though, but yeah.
Okay, any other questions on this item? All right, thank you.
Thanks, Bill.
So our next discussion item tonight is, our first discussion item is fees. Fee discussions. I want to kind of open this up by giving a little context. I had a short conversation with Dr. Schuler before the meeting, but we kind of got into this conversation really right around early summer of 2017. So we're kind of approaching on a 2-year conversation. I feel like the administration has come back to us 4 or 5 times now with more data, different way to present it. And as I went back to the December meeting we had, which was the last time we talked about this, we kind of got to the conversation with what's our end game. Okay, so I think we need, as a board, we need to get to the point of like, what are we asking for? There were looking at those conversations. It was, are we looking for a totally revamped model? Are we looking for minor tweaks to the model? Do we want the administration to recommend an increase or decrease in fees to reflect some of those concerns? How, I think Mr. Gambiani said, what do we want to do? How close do we want to get to a cost neutral scenario? If we're okay with what we're projecting, we should tell the administration that's what we're okay with. We talked a lot about fundraising. What are we putting on our students to go out there and, sell cards and cheesecake? So that's a big concern of some of our board members. So I think, we need to get this conversation to the point where we are clear to Dr. Schuler and the team, what do we want to get out of this conversation? I think, when we got into this, it was a little bit of, oh boy, the rough run and failed. We need to change a lot of things. This was one of the things that fell into the conversation. I think based on what we just talked about, maybe we don't have that same emotion right now. So let's kind of push ourselves to conclude and ask for something very specific so that we can get into the next school year with a clear decision. Anything else you would like to add to that, Dr. Short?
No, let me just highlight for you the two new pieces of information that we brought to you tonight. So we had shared, I think, at the last go around some information on activities, but I think Rob especially had asked us to try to put it in the same format as the athletic data, and so that's what we've done is basically move this chart. So this chart represents all of our student activities that kind of fall in the performing arts, what we call extracurricular and kind of honor society. So those are all of the student activities for which the district bears some form of expense. As you look down, largely that expense comes in the form of a sponsor, right, that works with or leads that activity. So you'll see that on the expenditure side. And again, very consistent with what you saw, I think, on the athletic side with the fall sports. as you look at the district expenditure for these activities by building, by the two high schools, it's pretty close, right? Our allocation is pretty close. Some slight variation that sometimes just has to do with length of time that a particular sponsor has been in an activity, but it's actually pretty close. Then when you move over to the revenue side, there aren't a lot of direct revenues in this area, and so again, just a reminder that previous board, when it made a different decision on the overall registration fee, and it increased, Bill, what year was that? This is going back many years now when the board made that move to absorb the fees for clubs, yeah. So going back, history over 10 years, the decision was made to increase the overall registration fee and not charge an individual student fee for all of these clubs, right? Yeah, for each. So what you'll see when it says fees collected, there aren't fees collected directly from the kids. That was part of the piece. But then when you go over to the additional revenue column, what you'll see is the combination of both fundraising efforts and a number of those activities do have a direct parent contribution. Show choir, marching band, youth and government, speech teams, and I think our chess clubs do. So there is a direct contribution that parents are paying. That was reflected on the last one. But again, what you'll see as an overall revenue source is that combination of fundraising and some of those direct contributions do bring in about $615,000 in revenue, right, that come into the program. So again, just by way of context, when we were looking at the athletic data, district was supporting about 75% of the costs associated with those. That overall distribution model around kind of your club activities is not quite at that 75%, but admittedly the big elements are show choir, and that kind of skews, I think, a little bit of that data, just because that's such a big chunk of the overall piece.
The additional revenue under the show choirs, what is that?
It's a combination of what parents are paying directly, so a fee that's charged to parents and fundraising activities. And the number is much larger at South. I'm going to tell you that's a combination of a couple of things that I do want to just mention. So there's an in and an out in that activity account that has to do with that major event they put on. So board members have been to that huge Friday, Saturday showcase event. All of the in and out for that event comes out of that piece, right? So to put that event on, the expenditure alone for that event is north of $100,000. A lot of that's revenue coming back in from the schools that are paying entry fees, from the spectator fees that are coming in. And so the South Show Choir isn't simply that much more expensive than North. Their participation rate is higher. They have two ensemble groups, but a chunk of that revenue has to do with that major event that they're putting on. It has just a huge in and out expenditure associated with it. And again, if you've been to that event, that's a huge endeavor to put a show choir event on. It's of the size that it is.
But those monies don't end up in the district.
They don't. Okay. No, anything in that additional revenue column, right? That $615,000. That none of that money flows through district budget, right? That's all activity account.
So going back to the other side then, we're saying that it's roughly $388,000 of district net cost for these programs. In the athletics were a comparable number, 500, 4 or 500?
For just the fall part, when we update that data for winter and spring athletics, it will be a little bit higher, but yeah, I think for the fall piece, it was
660.
660. Okay, so in the big picture then, we spend between this and that about $1 million a year to fund these activities as well as the sport activities, which is part of the educational program. We do charge some fees for this, not enough obviously to cover it. And at this point, I don't know that we are, I guess, you know, as we talked about in the Finance Committee, I think we said that, you know, we're not interested at this time of saying we should reduce those programs or eliminate those programs. We're not in that economic circumstance in which we need to give that consideration because we feel the benefit of that roughly $1 million continues to provide educational experiences and scholarship opportunities and so on for all the children affected by it. Is that kind of, I agree. That was great. So I guess in summary, to kind of put this thing to bed is that, you know, we're not going to jump up the fees at this point to try and cover $1 million of what I'll call shortfall or whatever the number total is for these programs and or others. And we have made some slight increases over the years, but we're not trying to self-sustain. It's not the objective of what I think the facility committee thought. And I think maybe we, over the 2-year period, we started thinking that's what we were trying to figure out here. And, you know, I don't know that that's what our goal really ever was. So, you know, I think this information now that we have should be monitored. But, you know, I think if we look at the last so many years, it's probably going to be consistently about $1 million. And, you know, and until such time as we can't afford, you know, in the budget, when we start looking at year 22 or whatever, 24, those are the kind of things we might have to consider to affect. But you know, we're not there now. And, you know, and I wouldn't propose from the Finance Committee any significant increase in fees. And we, you know, again, the consistent kind of CPI is acceptable to us. And, you know, that's what I think we ought to do.
And last thing, and I don't want to spend a lot of time, but I just want to mention this. So what we've provided for the board as well is an administrative regulation or administrative procedure. So not board policy, but as you look at that column, right? So again, I think to Jim's question, that $615,000 flows through activity accounts, right? So it does beg a question to say, when that's not coming through a district account, what's our oversight of that money, right? That is a lot of money to flow in and out of an activity account. And I think so from 2 lenses. One, to make sure we have appropriate controls to monitor that money. But 2, I think a question that Jim and Finance Committee have raised before is we should not be raising that kind of money simply to build up balances in those activity accounts as well, right? That is intended to be an in and an out. Raise that money if you need that money. If you don't need the money, don't raise the money. And so the administrative procedure that you just see here from the business office is our way of monitoring those activity accounts. Again, visiting them, auditing them on a quarterly basis to ensure that the accounting is appropriate, and 2, that there's a level of oversight to ask questions about some of the expenditures that are associated with it. Admittedly, there's a lot more site-based control over an activity account, right? Over how the money's being used, but we do want to make sure we've got appropriate controls into that. And so we did make sure that procedure was shared in terms of what that oversight's going to be.
Good question on that. So is this setting up a new protocol, or is this just documenting what we have been doing?
A little bit of both. It's documenting what we have been doing, but it is increasing the frequency through which the comptroller is out to look over the piece. The other piece is it is standardizing the data that either the activities or the athletic directors are providing for us in terms of this information, what's being raised for what purpose and what's being spent.
So is it communicating to activity sponsors that they should be doing something differently than they have been?
No, not necessarily at the sponsor level, at the supervision level. It's making sure that we are tracking that information in a consistent way, that we're gathering the same information for every proposed fundraiser, that we have the same basic basis of information.
I think the one issue we had in the Finance Committee was, on item 1 here, it talks about, that it must be submitted to principal and so on, and the families needs to know what the purpose of the fundraiser is. And it also gives Bill's staff the opportunity to say these dollars were spent in accordance with that goal. And that's what I think was missing before. It wasn't clear what it was being raised for, and it wasn't in the quote auditor within, which is our internal staff doing that, couldn't really say, why are we buying, fancy jackets or, things like that, because unless it's included in the goal or the program, it shouldn't be spent in that format, and that's really now a guideline that's available to evaluate. I mean, you can always look back and say there's an invoice that said that's right, but bigger question is, does it meet the objective of why the money was raised? And that's what we tried to get in that first paragraph up there. So, that was, I think, one of Chris's concerns, that, where's the money go? How, at the football tickets, what is happening to that? And I think that's an example now that we should be seeing, when we sell the restaurant brochures and so on, that there's an intent of what money is going to be used for. And, hopefully, as we now then audit that internally, that we will basically say, okay, it was spent on that, and if it wasn't, then something's wrong. Then we have to be we the board have to be put on notice of that problem. And and I think that's where a lot of parents were getting concerned. Does it really get spent for what we want, and what is the want? So I think, again, we tried to address this.
We actually spent, I think Jim was at the last Citizens Advisory Committee, where we actually spent some time on this topic, and I'll tell you, the feedback was kind of all over the place. I mean, and I guess what I mean by all over the place in an appropriate way is that I think there was a general understanding and belief that those that are accessing these activities should bear more of the cost, right? If you have a student or a child who's playing, you should pay more than child who's not. I think there was an acknowledgement that fundraising is increasingly placing a burden on people, and we've got to be cognizant of that. There were some that said, hey, I'd rather not have any fundraising take place. I'd rather just write a bigger check than do any fundraising. And some people that said, but I like the fact that my child has some skin in the game, because they do have to go out and sell some cards, and they're, that it's not just me writing the check. If they want to be a part, they've got to have some skin, some stake. So truly, I think the feedback was there. But I guess I would summarize that in the conversations that I've had with Mr. Crabtree on this topic to say, we should be able to continue to answer a couple of questions. When we're talking about fundraising, really by policy, fundraising should be voluntary. I know there's a lot of pressure that goes around fundraising, and there's a fine line, right, with that, but we've got to monitor it, right, at the point in which it's not at all voluntary, or that the kids are not feeling like there's any out that they truly can't do it, right? We gotta be mindful of that too, to the point that Jim made. We need to know what the money's being raised for, and we need to have an appropriate level of oversight that those activities or costs are needed, right, within the program, right, that there's some supervision within that. And then I think just the third and last piece is that I think if we're starting to see kind of this slow migration away from fundraising to just parents in the activity write an additional check instead of fundraising, I'm not sure that's really fundraising. I think that's a fee, and that fee should probably come through the fee oversight, processes. So I would agree with you. I think for this year, our best course of action is that as we look at this fee moving into next year, I think a modest increase in that activity athletic fee is appropriate, because we have not increased it in a while. By modest increase, again, I think we're going to look at something that perhaps with lacrosse and a few other adjustments coming in kind of keeps that overall percentage where it is, right around 75%, exactly what that'll be we've got to finalize that, but by modest, maybe it's a $5 or $10 increase into that. And I think that will kind of, I don't want to say put this to rest, but I think that's the course of action for this year. If we're going to significantly alter the model kind of away from fundraising, that's a broader conversation that we've got to engage, I think, more parents in, because we really need to understand, you know, at the end of the day, we need this money. We can't operate the programs without the revenue, because the district's not in a position to absorb another $1 million within your budget, and I don't believe you can run the programs without that revenue. Even if we dig deeper into it, there's some portion that may go away, but we're gonna need it. And so if we're gonna take the fundraising element away at some point in the future, it's gotta be replaced with something that's likely gonna come in the form of a different type of fee, right? That's gonna come, but I think that's gonna take some time to navigate through. So again, my recommendation for this year is, as we bring the fees back to you, probably won't be next month, that's usually April, that we would bring fees. It would likely be with a modest increase in that activity fee, and we will continue to monitor those core questions. And as we arrive at a point where we can't answer them, or we really want to study a broader model, I think we study a broader model.
I'm certainly comfortable with that, Jeff. We've heard anecdotal stories about parents being upset about some fundraising activities, but I haven't been presented with any consensus, and you certainly didn't get it from the CAC, any consensus on any of the divisions. I'm comfortable with staying the course, raising the fees a little bit, and if this procedure that we're talking about, operational services procedure, starts to suggest and indicate that we're having some difficulties and things are not going in the right direction, then it's appropriate, I think, for the board to conduct a survey of parents, to investigate what's going on, see if any major changes should be made. But I don't see any case right now convincing them being made for any major changes that we should stay the course.
Yeah, just for the record, the observation I have here is that when we talk about this, we all know, we all should know, that the greatest percent of the expenditures is related to coaches or stipends, and we need those people to run those programs. So I get that, but it's a big number, 7% of the total expenditures. And so I'm with Mr. Broman on this as well. I think if there are a lot of expenses we can't control, right? Salaries and stipends maybe, but outside activities, the officials, the medical teams, things like that, which are all part and parcel to the activities. I think as long as the parents are aware that the increase is based on and tied to something very concrete that we can't control, we're just trying to keep our loss at the current loss and not extend that loss, I think that would be a fair approach. Because again, we need the stipends to have the people run the programs and the salaries for the coaches and things like that. That we can manage, the other ones we can't. And so I think I would be supportive of that increase being tied to some of those outside expenses that are going to extend the loss that we're incurring now and might offset it a little bit.
I don't like the word loss. I think it's out-of-pocket cost is a better word. I don't know, just kind of puts a different twist on it.
But it's a worthwhile investment for what our students get out of it.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it sounds to me like we have some pretty clear consensus. Just want to confirm, lacrosse has been mentioned, that in the past year, 2 years now, carried or paid for fully by the parents. We want to bring that back into this mix.
Come in as funded as our other sports are funded.
Okay.
Do we end up having an official conversation in the meeting about that, or is that just an understanding that that's what?
Yeah. So I mean, I guess unless I'm hearing concern or direction otherwise, when we bring that feedback, we're going to bring the sport feedback, and it would apply to all of our officially sanctioned sports. So that's the point that happens when you're officially setting that fee, we can make a special note in that recommendation that will apply to across, just to make it expressively clear, but that would be the.
And is the lacrosse community all completely aware of that? Are they out there worrying about it?
They're a little bit anxious just because they're like waiting for the official word. I think, again, what I have communicated with them and Dr. Kyle's communicated with them is, I think based on our first discussion around that, we have every intention of treating it that way. But yeah, I think there's going to be a little bit of anxiety until it's like signed, sealed, delivered.
Okay, anything else? All right, there are two written reports in our board packet. One is the monthly financial reports. The other one is the Freedom of Information Act report. Are there any questions on any of those? Any reports from, we have two board committee reports included, two of them. Two of them included. Any questions on those particular meeting minutes from those committees? And then any other reports from board members?
Thanks. So this feels like a long time ago, before the vortex, but I was at the CAC meeting in January, and it was a big discussion of student fees. Really not anything new to add to what Jeff said. A lot of conversations, and a lot of it focused really quickly on the fundraising piece, theoretical and practical and all of that. And my conclusion at the end of that meeting was that they had a lot of the same conversations we've had here, and they didn't come up with a clear answer to anything more than we have to. So, I was at the Student Excellence Foundation board meeting this week. Top Golf has been mentioned. They had a very successful fundraiser, brought in more money than last year. They're now looking to their next event, which is to celebrate our stars. That they're going to do in April. They've just opened, I believe, the nomination window, and they're keeping it a nice, tight 2-week window. And one of the things that came up is wondering what kind of ways they can find to solicit nominations from students in particular. So there's a little conversation around that. The new executive director has been with them for about 6 months, which seems like it has zipped by me because I still think that she's new, but in her report, she had just a list that went on and on and on of meetings and conversations she's been having with people, just cultivating relationships around town. So it seems like that was a good move to put the director in there. She did a chat with the mayor, Mayor Rusk's final chat with the mayor sequence, so if anybody wants to pull that up and see what she's been up to. That's online. The incubator classes apparently had sort of a mid-year pitch kind of round going through, and unfortunately I missed those. They were at the beginning of this week. So that class is up and running, a lot of groups working like we said last year. And I think they have a grant deadline for their second round of grants in the year coming up soon, so there's a lot going on with this organization. And they did also talk about the Jefferson campaign, and I feel like that's kind of in its infancy. That's my sense there. And finally, last report, Rob and I did get a chance last week to go visit both partners, and as it turned out, TCD, which neither one of us had seen, so that was a big afternoon. I was very pleased. I don't know if I'm assuming you've all been to Partners. This was my first time there. It helped me truly understand who these people are, and when we're asking them to help us with some students who are struggling, now I understand what they're doing with that, so I appreciate that visit. My sense was it's a very intimate setting. They do definitely get to know their students and collaborate with the sending schools of those students, so they're working with us to help get those kids back on track. So a lot of times a social worker there who seemed like she really was attuned to these kids. And there's, I want to say 54 kids there right now. And the TCD was just mind-blowing. It's, what was Mike's title that took us around?
What is Mike's name? What is his title?
He's like the CEO of it, there's a principal, he's kind of he's the executive director of the whole place, and then there's a principal, an assistant principal, so he oversees everything, and then he reports to the, he reports to
the Dallas board. So there's a board of directors and he reports directly to us, but he oversees the administration and all the teachers.
He took us around and showed us all of their major programs and talked about all of their, it's wonderful we have that resource to get as far away from us as it is.
You mentioned 54 students somewhere.
That's a partners.
And that's 54 of our students?
No.
Oh.
They have 9 this year, 9 middle school students and 45 high school students.
Okay. So the entire school has 54 students, and we have somewhere in the area of 10.
And that number will grow, so it changes, obviously, as things happen.
You will have one student there right now. So that is your alternative placement to his patient. So
that's only one, okay.
Yeah, I'd like to give a brief report on the HR policy committee meeting we had on Monday with the senior leadership team and with Ken Carter from Press. We're now enrolling, this district is now enrolling in the Press program. Prior to this, Bob Rammer, as assistant superintendent, was responsible for making sure that our policies are updated and revised accordingly. And it was a tremendous task that he went through. In my experience as a lawyer, I've had clients who have gotten in trouble because they didn't keep their policies up to date or look at them occasionally, make sure they were revised and updated. And so that's been always a concern of mine. You may recall 2 years ago, the HR policy committee looked at every single policy to see if they should be revised or reviewed, or changed or eliminated. It was a very cumbersome process. I think this move to Press is a deal. I applaud Jeff for arranging for this and negotiating a good fee for the service, a reduced fee for the service. I think it's something we ought to relieve Charlie of doing because it is a tremendous task. In the 3 hours we spent on Monday with Mr. Carter, the beginning of the process of Press taking over administrating our policies. They will review all of our policies every 5 years. Every policy will be reviewed at least once every 5 years. They update the policies according to legislation that's passed either by the General Assembly or regulations that come out of the ISBE. And what we spent a lot of time on Monday was reviewing 30 or 40 policies where school districts have some discretion as to what that policy, how that policy will read and what shape it will take. And he was asking us what directions we have taken in the past, which are what we'd like to do in the future. By and large, he will take that information and incorporate it into those policies. We will review about 8 or 9 policies that are not consistent with necessarily the Press language, but we're close. We need to make some decisions on how they should be revised. And we're going to be doing that over the next 30 days and then tendering those policies back to him. And then over the course of time, these policies will be presented from time to time for the board for posting and review. So just a quick summary. I think this is an excellent move, and I'm very, very pleased that we're taking this.
Any other reports? Okay. Topics for future discussion is Master Technology Plan and FIT, Future of Instruction and Technology. That's at our next meeting, which is on February 27, 2019, which is a committee of the whole at 7 o'clock at the SSC. The next regular meeting is March 13, 2019, at 7 p.m. at Wheaton North High School. And do we have any public comments? I still don't get to read it.
Before we get there, I'm sorry, I didn't, on the reports from the board members, the CAC committee, that, again, I'm glad we're talking about it at the board level. And, you know, I would like, I notice there's no minutes in here about it, but I think it's important if we're going to have them involved, that we get that feedback before we discuss some of these items. You know, just, again, we kind of did it when we talked about the fee thing, but, you know, I recall I went to one when we talked about the calendar changes, which again, were very controversial topics. And I think the insight of what we're getting feedback from that group would be helpful when we discuss it. So I'd like to know a little more up front versus after. So I think that would be something, particularly when we get these kind of conversational or controversial areas.
Brad, can I ask a question or something here? I've RSVP'd to a lot of activities. Do we know, is there an ISB meeting coming up in March or something? What is it? March 6th, okay. Is there, I didn't get a flyer on that.
You responded and you can register.
Okay.
Can I do just one quick clarification? February 27th is a committee of the whole. I talked to Brad a little bit earlier today. It is likely just based on timeline of a hire. We've been working on a hire to replace Mr. Coleman at Bauer, who's retiring at the end of the year. And I believe we will be in a place to actually bring that hire recommendation to the board in February. And it actually would serve us better to approve the hire in February rather than have that sit until the next board meeting. So it is likely the February 27th meeting, we will actually post it as a regular meeting, have just one agenda item, which is the approval of that personnel report, and then we'll adjourn into workshop setting like we do. But so technically that next meeting will be posted as a regular meeting, as a business meeting.
Okay, the closed session was removed earlier from the agenda, so we don't have any further action tonight from the board. So do I have a motion to adjourn this meeting?
So moved. So moved.
Second. Okay.
I didn't want Jim to do all the motions. You know, just so I want to make it clear on that you know, when you guys as committee members are we're talking those topics, that's why I always like to see the committee making the motions and seconding it versus just me here falling asleep or something. It's not, I'm not, so, not yet.
So this is not a committee motion.
No, this is a motion.
So this is
I'm making a motion.
Moved by Mr. Matheson, and seconded by Mr. Roman to adjourn the meeting. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Anybody opposed? We are done.